Hello friends, welcome to Dead Signal FM. Please, like the video, subscribe, and tell me in the comments where are you watching from tonight. Get comfortable, relax, and let's begin. I shouldn't be here. That's what I kept telling myself as I descended the crumbling stone steps, my headlamp casting weak yellow light on ancient masonry. The landslide had exposed this place just 3 days ago, an underground church no one knew existed, buried for centuries beneath the hillside outside my rural research station. As the Geological Survey's only on-site archaeologist, I'd been tasked with preliminary documentation before the proper teams arrived next week. But something was wrong with the radio. That's what first made my skin crawl. I'd been photographing the exposed entrance when my field radio, set to the emergency channel as protocol required when working alone, began to emit a strange, rhythmic static. Not the usual white noise of poor reception, but something that pulsed with unnatural regularity. 3 quick bursts, silence, 2 long drones, silence, then a rapid staccato of clicks that made my molars ache. When voices emerged from this pattern, I nearly dropped the radio. They spoke in a language I couldn't identify, not Latin or Greek or any Romance language I recognized from my archaeological training. The voices overlapped, distant yet somehow intimate, as if whispering directly into my ear canal. Words I couldn't understand, but that nonetheless felt horrifyingly familiar, like something I'd known in childhood but had been forced to forget. I switched the radio off. The voices continued for 3 more seconds before cutting to silence. That should have been my sign to leave, to wait for backup. Instead, I found myself descending into the earth, drawn by academic curiosity and something else. Something I couldn't name, something that pulled at me like a fishhook caught under my sternum. The church itself was small but immaculately preserved, protected from the elements for what must have been nearly a millennium. My light revealed frescoes unlike any I'd seen in European religious architecture. Figures with elongated limbs and faces that seemed to shift when viewed from different angles. The altar stone bore no cross but was carved with swirling patterns that made my eyes water when I tried to follow their paths. "Hello!" I called out, my voice swallowed immediately by the dense underground air. The sound didn't echo as it should have in such a space. It simply stopped, as if the very air had consumed it. I set up my portable LED work lights, grateful for their bright, artificial glow. As I moved deeper into the space, my boots left prints in a fine layer of gray-black dust that covered the floor. I knelt to examine it, rubbing it between my fingers. Not dirt or sand, but something finer, almost like ash, though there were no signs of fire damage anywhere. The smell hit me then. Not the expected mustiness of an ancient, sealed space, but something sharper, like scorched metal and ozone, with underlying notes of something organic and rotten. I drew my shirt collar up over my nose, breathing through the fabric as I continued my survey. In the far corner of the church, a narrow doorway led to what appeared to be a small antechamber. My headlamp illuminated a stone table surrounded by 7 chairs arranged in a perfect circle. On the table sat a clay vessel, unbroken and sealed with wax that had hardened to an obsidian black. I approached carefully, my archaeological training battling with a growing sense of wrongness. The vessel was decorated with the same swirling patterns as the altar, and as I leaned closer to photograph it, I noticed something alarming. The wax seal was warm to the touch. Not merely room temperature, but actively, unnaturally warm, as if the vessel contained something living or had been recently heated. That's when I heard it. A soft pattering above me, like raindrops on the stone ceiling. But we were underground, well below the surface, and the forecast had predicted clear skies for days. I tilted my head back, shining my light upward. The ceiling was moving. What I had mistaken for an ornate relief pattern was actually a writhing mass of tiny black insects, their bodies forming and reforming those same swirling patterns I'd seen on the altar and vessel. As my light hit them, they scattered, flowing along the ceiling like a living river of ink before settling into a new configuration. One that, with mounting horror, I recognized as a crude map of the geological research station where I'd been living and working for the past 6 months. My hand trembled, causing the light to shake. The insects responded to this movement, flowing again, this time forming what looked like a human figure, stick-like limbs, featureless oval head. The figure appeared to be walking, approaching a small rectangle that could only represent the entrance to this underground church. The figure on the ceiling reached the rectangle, then stopped. Slowly, its head rotated 180 degrees, as if looking back over its shoulder. Looking at me, I backed away, nearly stumbling over one of the chairs. The vessel on the table rattled slightly, though I hadn't touched it or the table. The insects overhead dispersed, spreading evenly across the ceiling once more, becoming invisible against the dark stone. "This isn't happening?" I whispered, my voice sounding wrong in my ears. Too high, too breathless. I needed air, needed to get back to the surface. I turned to leave the antechamber. The doorway was gone. Where the opening had been just moments before, there was now only solid stone wall. I pressed my hands against it frantically, searching for cracks or seams, anything to indicate where the door had been. Nothing. The wall was cool and smooth under my palms, as if the doorway had never existed at all. "Help!" I shouted, pounding on the wall. Again, my voice fell dead, traveling nowhere. The only response was a faint vibration from the vessel on the table behind me. I turned slowly, light trembling across the room. The wax seal on the vessel had begun to crack, thin black lines spreading across its surface like a spiderweb. Something was leaking out. Not liquid, but a wispy dark substance that behaved like smoke yet moved with purpose, curling and uncurling in the still air. My headlamp flickered, dimmed, and for one terrible moment went out completely. When it came back on, the chairs around the table were no longer empty. No one sat in them. There were no visible bodies, but the chairs had been repositioned, slightly pulled back from the table, tilted at angles that suggested an invisible congregation had just risen to their feet. The chair closest to me lay overturned, as if its occupant had stood up in a hurry. The smoke-like substance continued to pour from the cracking vessel, more rapidly now. It pooled on the table's surface before cascading over the edges like a waterfall, disappearing into the ashen dust on the floor. Where it touched, the ash stirred, forming tiny whirlpools that began to creep toward my feet. I pressed myself against the wall where the door had been, fumbling for my phone. No signal, of course. We were underground and in a remote area to begin with. Still, I activated the voice recorder, speaking rapidly. "This is Dr. Eliana Marsh, June 7th, at the Blackridge site. Something is wrong with the church chamber. The entrance has disappeared somehow. There's a vessel leaking some kind of smoke or gas. If anyone finds this..." My voice caught as the floor beneath me shifted. The ash and whatever dark substance had poured from the vessel were combining, hardening into something that resembled wet concrete. But this material moved with intention, flowing around my boots, beginning to climb up the leather in thin tendrils. I kicked frantically, breaking free and leaping onto the stone table. The vessel tipped over, now completely split open. Inside was nothing but a small black stone, smooth and oval, like a river pebble. Despite everything happening around me, I found myself reaching for it, some deep archaeological instinct compelling me to preserve this artifact. The moment my fingers closed around the stone, the room plunged into absolute darkness. Both my headlamp and the LED work lights died simultaneously. The darkness was complete, a perfect, smothering blackness that felt physical, pressing against my eyeballs and filling my mouth when I gasped. And in that darkness, I felt the stone in my palm begin to pulse like a tiny heart. A voice whispered directly in my ear, speaking that same unfamiliar language from the radio. Only now I understood every word. "You have returned to us, finally. The vessel is opened. The way is prepared." The voice wasn't coming from any specific direction. It seemed to originate inside my own head, resonating through my skull. I squeezed my eyes shut, though it made no difference in the absolute darkness. "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice cracking. "What is this place?" "You know us," the voice replied. "You have always known us. You made us. We are your reflection, cast across the broken surface." The stone in my hand grew warmer, the pulsing more rapid. I tried to drop it, but my fingers wouldn't respond. It was as if the stone had fused to my palm. "I don't understand," I said, fighting to keep my breathing steady. "I've never been here before." A sound like distant laughter rippled through the darkness. "Time moves differently beneath. What is yet to be for you has already occurred for us. You will create us, have created us, are creating us now." The darkness began to lift, not from any return of my lights, but from a soft, bluish glow emanating from the walls themselves. As visibility returned, I saw that the room had changed. The chairs were gone. The table beneath me had transformed into what looked like a stone sarcophagus, its lid carved with my own face, eyes closed as if in sleep. I scrambled off it, heart pounding so violently I could feel it in my throat. The room had expanded, the walls now easily twice as far away as before. And on those walls, illuminated by that eerie blue light, were drawings, thousands of them, overlapping, covering every inch of stone. They were my drawings. Sketches I'd made during my archaeological career, site maps I'd drawn, even doodles from the margins of my field notebooks. But interspersed among them were drawings I didn't recognize. Things I had never seen, never documented. Creatures with too many limbs. Symbols that hurt to look at directly, and repeated over and over that same swirling pattern from the altar. "How is this possible?" I whispered, turning in a slow circle. "These are your hand, yes," the voice interrupted, "guided by memory, memory of what is to come." The floor began to vibrate beneath me, a low tremor that quickly intensified. Dust and small stones rained from the ceiling. For a moment, I felt a surge of relief. Perhaps this was another landslide, one that would open a way out. But the tremors weren't natural. They came in those same rhythmic patterns I'd heard on the radio. 3 quick bursts, 2 long rumbles, then a rapid staccato that made the entire chamber shake violently. The blue light pulsed in sync with these vibrations, growing brighter with each cycle. The stone in my hand had become almost unbearably hot, but still my fingers wouldn't release it. "The opening comes," the voice said, now seeming to emanate from the walls themselves. "As it always has, as it always will." With a deafening crack, the far wall split open, revealing not the outside world but a vast, cavernous space beyond. From my vantage point, I could see what looked like an immense underground city, structures built from the same stone as the church, extending farther than my eyes could penetrate. Blue light pulsed through this metropolis, flowing like blood through veins. And there were figures moving among those structures, tall, emaciated silhouettes that flowed rather than walked, their movements liquid and wrong. "No," I said, backing away. "This isn't real. None of this is real. Reality is malleable beneath the surface," the voice said, now sounding like a chorus of speakers. "Time folds here. Space bends. What was becomes what will be." The figures in the distance had noticed the opening. They were moving toward it now, toward me, their pace quickening. I turned to run, not caring which direction, just away from that opening and what was coming through it. But my body wouldn't respond. I stood frozen, the stone in my hand now pulsing so rapidly it was like a continuous vibration. "You cannot leave," the voice said, almost gently now. "You have never left. You will create us with your knowledge, your memories. You will draw us into being across centuries." I wanted to scream, but my voice had abandoned me. I could only watch as the first of those liquid figures reached the threshold of the opening, its form resolving into something more solid as it did. It was humanoid but wrong, limbs too long, joints bending in impossible directions. Its face was obscured by what looked like a cowl or hood, but where there should have been darkness beneath, there was only that same blue light pouring from empty eye sockets. The figure reached out one elongated hand toward me. I felt something tear inside my mind. A barrier breaking, memories flooding in that weren't mine, couldn't be mine. Images of this place through different times, seen through different eyes. My eyes, but not from this lifetime. I saw myself returning here again and again across centuries, always drawn back, always forgetting until it was too late. I saw myself making those drawings on the walls, recording what I had seen in this place, creating a blueprint that allowed these entities to maintain their existence in the spaces between time. The stone in my hand shattered, fragments embedding themselves in my palm. I felt no pain, only a spreading numbness as the blue light began to course through my veins, visible beneath my skin. The figure was directly before me now, its face inches from mine. From beneath the hood, a voice that was my own spoke words I had spoken before, would speak again. The cycle continues. The vessel opens. The way is prepared. With a violent jerk, I found myself able to move again. I stumbled backward, nearly falling. My hand was empty, no sign of the stone or its fragments. My veins no longer glowed. The figure was gone, as was the opening to that impossible city. I was standing in the antechamber as it had been when I first entered. Small stone table, 7 chairs, sealed vessel. The doorway to the main church chamber was open once more. My legs shaking, I fled through it, sprinting across the main chamber toward the steps that led to the surface. I didn't look back, didn't stop to retrieve my equipment. The only thing that mattered was escape, reaching the open air, the sunlight. I burst from the entrance, gasping, the late afternoon sun momentarily blinding me after the darkness below. I fell to my knees in the dirt, gulping fresh air, tears streaming down my face. My radio lay where I had dropped it earlier, still silent. I grabbed it, switching it on, desperate to hear another human voice. Static crackled, then cleared. Base to Marsh, come in Marsh. We've been trying to reach you for hours. Over. I fumbled with the talk button. This is Marsh. I need extraction. Now, something's wrong with the site. Over. Pause, then copy that, Marsh. What's your situation? Over. The church, there's something down there. Something alive. I can't explain. Just send someone, please. Over. Another, longer pause. Marsh, what church? The landslide revealed some old foundations, but there's no structure. Over. I turned slowly, looking back at the hillside where I'd spent the past several hours. Where stone steps had led down into darkness, there was nothing but exposed earth and broken rock. No entrance, no church. But I was just... My voice trailed off. Had I imagined it all? A hallucination brought on by heat, dehydration, isolation? Marsh, are you injured? Over. I looked down at my hands. My right palm was unmarked. No sign of any embedded stone fragments. But my left hand, the one that had held that pulsing stone, was smeared with ash-gray dust, the same dust that had covered the floor of that impossible church. And there, just visible beneath the skin of my wrist, was the faintest trace of blue, pulsing in rhythm with my heartbeat. I'm fine, I heard myself say, though the voice didn't sound like my own. False alarm. Just got a little disoriented. Over. Copy that. Want us to send someone anyway? Over. Negative. I'll continue the survey. Marsh out. I set the radio down and stared at my wrist. The blue trace was gone now, or perhaps it had never been there at all. But as I watched, the ash on my palm seemed to shift, forming briefly into that same swirling pattern from the altar before a light breeze dispersed it. The sun was setting, shadows lengthening across the hillside. In the distance, I could see the lights of the research station coming on as darkness approached. I should return there, report what had happened or what I thought had happened. Instead, I found myself walking back toward the exposed section of hillside, my feet moving of their own accord. There was work to be done here, important work, drawings to be made, records to keep. The vessel must be prepared. The way must be opened. After all, I had always been here. I would always return, and somewhere beneath my feet, they were waiting. The first thing I noticed was the smell. Not the damp or the mold, or even the metallic tang that pervaded the abandoned water treatment facility. This was different. A sickly sweet odor that seemed to pulse in and out of existence, like a heartbeat. 3 seconds present, 2 seconds gone. 3 seconds present, 2 seconds gone. Too rhythmic to be a draft. Too precise to be my imagination. I'd been documenting forgotten industrial sites across the Midwest for nearly a decade, but this place, nestled deep in the Ozark Mountains, half buried by forest, was different. The Holloway Municipal Water Treatment Plant had been decommissioned in 1976 after a regulatory inspection uncovered dangerous levels of chemical contamination. The official report cited equipment failure, but local rumors suggested something more sinister, something the town wanted buried. The facility had been abandoned for almost 50 years now.
No salvi. No demolition.
Just locked gates and warning signs, gradually being reclaimed by nature. I'd found references to it in old newspaper archives while researching another project, and the conspicuous absence of information made it irresistible. I remember checking my phone as I stepped through the rusted maintenance entrance I discovered. No signal, as expected. I was at least 16 miles from the nearest town, with dense forest and elevation working against any possibility of communication. I was entirely alone, or so I believed. The first floor was mundane enough. Administrative offices with ancient filing cabinets, control rooms with analog dials frozen in time. But as I descended the concrete stairwell to the filtration level, that rhythmic smell intensified. Sweet, then gone. Sweet, then gone. I switched on my industrial-grade flashlight, the beam cutting through darkness that felt almost viscous. That's when I heard it. A sequence of clicks emanating from somewhere deep within the facility. Not random, not mechanical. Deliberate. Click, click, click. Pause. Click, click. Pause. Click, 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 click. I froze, listening. The pattern repeated exactly. My first thought was water. Perhaps some ancient pipe still occasionally receiving pressure. But no water facility built in the 1950s would have pipes that could remain intact after decades of neglect. "Hello," I called out, immediately regretting it. My voice didn't echo as it should have in the cavernous space. Instead, it seemed to sink into the darkness, absorbed. The clicking stopped. I forced myself to continue, following my original plan to document the main filtration chamber. According to the blueprints I'd found, it should have been an impressive space, a cathedral to water purification, with massive concrete basins and overhead walkways. What I found instead defied explanation. The filtration chamber had been transformed. The concrete basins were there, but they were dry, and every surface, walls, floors, the basins themselves, was covered in a thin layer of what appeared to be salt. Not scattered, but meticulously arranged in intricate patterns that seemed to flow and connect across the entire room. Thousands of tiny white lines, forming what looked like circuit diagrams, or perhaps a language I'd never seen before. I approached the nearest basin and crouched to examine the patterns. As I leaned in, my breath disturbed the delicate arrangement, sending tiny crystals dancing in the beam of my flashlight. But instead of scattering randomly, they moved with purpose, reforming the pattern a few inches away. I jerked backward, nearly losing my balance. Click, click, click. Pause. Click, click. The sound had returned, louder now, seeming to come from all directions at once. I swung my flashlight in a wide arc, the beam cutting through the darkness. Nothing moved in the shadows, but the clicking continued, forming that same deliberate pattern. Then I realized it was Morse code. I'd learned it as a kid, fascinated by old spy movies. Rusty as my skills were, I could still make out the message being tapped. WESYO. My skin prickled with electric fear. The air around me suddenly felt charged, heavy with presence. I backed toward the entrance, my flashlight beam juddering with my shaking hand. "Who's there?" I demanded, trying to sound authoritative instead of terrified. "This is private property." A lie, of course. I was the trespasser here. The clicking stopped again, but the silence that followed was worse. Expectant, as if something was listening intently. That's when my flashlight flickered. Not a dying battery flicker, but a deliberate one. Click, click, click. Pause. Click, click. The same pattern, now coming from the device in my hand. I dropped it with a strangled cry. It hit the concrete floor with a crack but didn't break, rolling instead in a wide arc, its beam sweeping the room like a lighthouse. As it turned, it illuminated something that hadn't been there before. A single perfect handprint in the salt coating the far wall, at least 8 feet off the ground. Too high for any normal person to reach. My rational mind scrambled for explanations. Kids playing elaborate pranks. Some homeless person with a warped sense of humor. A fellow urban explorer trying to scare me off. But deep down, I knew better. There were no footprints in the salt besides my own. No signs of recent human presence besides the equipment I'd brought. I retrieved my flashlight, backing toward the stairwell, unwilling to turn my back on that handprint. The clicking had stopped, but now another sound emerged. A low, wet gurgling from the ancient pipes overhead. I glanced up and immediately wished I hadn't. The ceiling was moving. Not the ceiling itself, but something on it. A thin film of what looked like water, defying gravity as it crawled across the concrete in spiraling patterns. It moved with purpose, forming shapes that almost resembled letters before dissolving and reforming. I ran, back up the stairs, taking them 2 at a time, my flashlight beam bouncing wildly ahead of me. I reached the administrative level, gasping for breath, and paused to collect myself. Surely whatever I'd seen was a product of fear and isolation, my mind playing tricks in the darkness. That's when I noticed the time on my watch, 3:47 p.m. I'd entered the facility shortly after noon, intending to spend no more than an hour inside. Where had the time gone? 3.5 hours vanished. I had no memory of what I'd done during that time. Pulling out my camera, I frantically scrolled through the photos I'd taken. Nothing after my initial shots of the entrance and the first administrative room. I was certain I'd been photographing everything. It was my habit, my process. But the evidence suggested otherwise. A sudden warmth spread through my pocket. My phone, which shouldn't have had reception, was heating up like it was receiving data at an impossible rate. I pulled it out and found the screen alive with activity, the photo app flipping through images I'd never taken. Pictures of the filtration room from angles I couldn't have achieved without climbing equipment. Close-ups of the salt patterns. A video slowly scrolling through rows of ancient filing cabinets in a room I'd never entered. And then, a photo of me, asleep or unconscious on the floor of the filtration chamber. The salt patterns rearranged around my body in concentric circles. The timestamp showed it was taken 2 hours ago. I dropped the phone as if it had burned me, clattered to the floor, the screen going black. When I picked it up again, the battery was completely drained. I had to get out. Now, but as I turned toward the exit, I realized I wasn't where I thought I was. This wasn't the administrative area I'd passed through earlier. The layout was similar, but wrong somehow, doors in different places, hallways that curved where they should have been straight. That smell returned, sweet, then gone. Sweet, then gone. But now accompanied by a sound like distant voices, speaking words just below the threshold of comprehension. I chose a direction and ran, no longer caring about documenting anything. I just needed to find an exit, any exit. Each room I passed through seemed to blend into the next, a labyrinth of abandoned offices and control panels. The building shouldn't have been this large. It was as if the interior space was expanding, creating new rooms where none had existed before. After what felt like an hour of frantic searching, I rounded a corner and found myself facing a heavy metal door marked Emergency Exit. Relief flooded through me as I pushed against the crash bar. The door swung open with surprising ease, revealing the filtration chamber, the same one I'd fled from earlier. But it had changed. The salt patterns had grown more complex, more three-dimensional, rising from the floor in delicate structures that resembled coral formations. And in the center of the room stood a single chair, my folding equipment chair that I'd left in my truck outside. On the seat was my journal, open to a page filled with writing I didn't recognize, though it was unmistakably my handwriting. I approached slowly, unable to stop myself despite every instinct screaming for me to run. The journal entry was dated today, but the time listed was 8:17 p.m., hours in the future. The text was a detailed account of everything I'd experienced since entering the facility, including my current moment of discovery. It continued beyond, describing what I would apparently do next. According to the journal, I would descend to a sublevel I hadn't known existed. I would follow the sound of running water to a sealed containment room. I would find something there, something the facility had been built to contain rather than process. Something that had been waiting for decades for someone who could help it escape. I slammed the journal shut and backed away, trembling. This was madness. I needed to leave to find the real exit. I turned to flee again, only to find myself face to face with the wall where the handprint had been. It had multiplied. Dozens of identical handprints now covered the wall, each one precisely the same size and shape, arranged in a perfect grid. As I watched, a new one appeared. Not pressed into the salt, but forming from within it, the crystals rearranging themselves before my eyes. The temperature plummeted. My breath clouded in front of me, forming shapes that lingered rather than dissipating. I could have sworn they formed words, fragments of sentences, questions directed at me specifically. How did you find this place? Why did you come alone? Do you remember us? That last question triggered something. A memory I couldn't quite grasp, slippery and elusive. Had I been here before? I'd researched this place, certainly, but now I questioned how I'd found the information in the first place. The documents that had led me here, had they found me rather than the other way around? A sound drew my attention upward, water dripping from a pipe. Except it wasn't water. The drops fell in that same rhythmic pattern. Click, 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 pause, click, click, and when they hit the ground, they didn't splatter. They bounced, like tiny rubber balls, rolling across the floor to gather at my feet. The drops began to coalesce, forming a small puddle that reflected my face. But the reflection was wrong. It smiled when I didn't, and its eyes, God, its eyes. They were empty, just dark hollows with pinpricks of light deep within. I stumbled backward, and my heel caught on something. A small metal door set into the floor, like an access hatch. It hadn't been there moments before, I was certain. Above it, scratched into the concrete wall, were 5 words. You promised to come back. I had never been here before. I would have remembered. This place couldn't have existed in my past. I would have remembered a nightmare like this, unless I had been made to forget. The hatch at my feet swung open of its own accord, revealing a narrow ladder descending into darkness. From below came the sound of running water and, beneath that, a whisper that formed my name with perfect clarity. It knew me. Whatever waited in those depths recognized me, had perhaps been waiting for me specifically. The realization sent ice through my veins, but with it came a terrible curiosity. What if the journal was right? What if there was something down there I was meant to find? I found myself kneeling beside the hatch, one hand already reaching for the ladder. Something about this felt predetermined, as if I were an actor who had forgotten my lines but was being guided back to the script. The sweet smell was overwhelming now, no longer pulsing but constant, cloying. My head swam with it as I took the first step down the ladder. The metal was ice cold against my palms, and slick with something that wasn't water. Something viscous that clung to my skin in threads when I tried to wipe it away. The beam of my flashlight revealed a narrow vertical shaft that descended at least 30 feet before opening into a larger space. As I climbed down, that clicking Morse code started again, but now from below. Not threatening, but welcoming, beckoning.
VSSEDYOU.
The air grew colder as I descended, but not in the way of underground spaces. This was an active cold, pushing against me like a living thing, exploring the contours of my body with frigid fingers. By the time I reached the bottom, I was shivering uncontrollably. I found myself in a circular chamber much smaller than the filtration room above. The walls were lined with ancient copper pipes, all converging on a central point, a large basin filled with what appeared to be black water. The liquid was perfectly still, reflecting the beam of my flashlight like polished obsidian. Around the basin, carved into the concrete floor, was a name. My name. Not my current name, the one I use now, but my birth name. The one I'd legally changed 15 years ago after leaving home. The name no one had called me for over a decade. How could this place know that? The black water in the basin began to move, not with ripples but with purpose, rising in the center like a column. It held that shape for a moment, then collapsed back with a splash. A moment later, it rose again, higher this time, taking on a vaguely humanoid form before dissolving. It was trying to communicate, or worse, trying to take shape. I should have run. Every horror movie I'd ever seen screamed at me to flee, to climb back up that ladder and not stop running until I was miles away from this cursed place. But my body wouldn't obey. I was transfixed, watching as the liquid rose a third time. This time it held its form, a figure about my height, featureless but unmistakably human in shape. It stood there, swaying slightly, as if waiting for something, for me to recognize it. And God help me, I did, not with my eyes or my mind, but with something deeper, more primitive. Some part of me knew this thing, had known it for a very long time. The figure extended what might have been an arm, reaching toward me. From its surface, a small tendril of the black liquid separated, hanging in the air between us like an offering, or an invitation. The temperature dropped again, so cold now that my extremities were going numb. The tendril moved closer, just inches from my face. I could see now that it wasn't truly black, but filled with minute particles that shifted and moved within it, like stars in a miniature galaxy. It wanted me to touch it, to join with it, to remember, and standing there, shivering in that impossible cold, a terrible thought occurred to me. What if I had been here before? What if whatever happened in this place 48 years ago hadn't been an accident or a contamination? What if it had been a communion? The missing time since I'd entered the facility. The journal that knew what I would do. The familiar patterns in the salt that had called to something deep within me. Perhaps I hadn't discovered this place at all. Perhaps it had called me back. I found my voice, hoarse and small in the oppressive silence. What are you? The liquid figure didn't speak. Not with words. Instead, images flashed through my mind. This same room, decades earlier, filled with people in white lab coats. Equipment humming with power. The basin, not filled with black liquid but with ordinary water, being charged with something. An experiment. A doorway. And through that doorway something had come. Something ancient and patient and hungry. Something that had been waiting for me to return. The tendril touched my cheek, cold as the void between stars. But instead of fear, I felt a sudden rush of recognition, like meeting a childhood friend after decades apart. The liquid spread across my skin, not wet but magnetic, drawing me toward the basin. I resisted, clinging to the fragile certainty that I was Daniel Morgan, age 37, industrial photographer and documentarian. That I had never been to this facility before today. That whatever memories were trying to surface were false, implanted by this thing to manipulate me. But then the figure spoke, not in Morse code or reformed salt crystals, but with a voice that emerged from the liquid itself, resonating with harmonics that human vocal cords could never produce. It said my original name, not the one carved in the floor, but my true name, the one given to me before language, before birth. The name that existed only in the electrical patterns of my developing brain, never spoken aloud in this world. And I remembered being 9 years old, visiting my father at work at this very facility. I remembered wandering away from the tour group, finding this hidden room. I remembered the basin, empty then, and the voice that came from the pipes, promising friendship to a lonely child. I remembered our pact, sealed with a drop of blood from my pricked finger. The entity needed a vessel, a way to exist in our world. Not now, but later, when I was grown, when I could help it fully manifest. I remembered the men in suits who found me, who took me away to a special hospital for 3 months. The treatments, the careful reshaping of memories, the new identity they gave me afterward, the new town, the new life, all to make me forget what had happened here. All to make me forget my promise. The facility hadn't been abandoned because of contamination. It had been sealed to contain what they couldn't destroy, an entity that existed partially in our dimension, partially in another. An entity that had been patient, so patient, waiting for the one person who could help it cross over completely. Me. The figure in the basin extended both arms now, inviting me into an embrace. The black liquid lapped at the edges of the basin, eager, hungry. I took a step back, fighting the magnetic pull of recognition and ancient obligation. This wasn't right. Whatever promise a 9-year-old had made wasn't binding. Whatever this thing was, it had been contained for good reason. "No," I said, my voice stronger now. "I don't know you. I don't owe you anything." The liquid figure froze, its featureless face tilting as if confused. Then it began to change, the smooth surface breaking apart into countless tendrils that whipped the air with increasing fury. The temperature plummeted further, ice crystals forming on my eyelashes, my nostrils, my lips. The containment had never been about chemicals or water safety. It had been about this thing, this entity trapped between worlds. And I had just rejected it. I turned to run, to climb back up the ladder and escape this nightmare. But as I moved, the pipes around the room began to vibrate, emitting that same click-click-click pattern at deafening volume. The concrete beneath my feet cracked, salt crystals erupting from the fissures, growing at impossible speed. I reached the ladder and began to climb, but the metal rungs were now coated in ice, slick and treacherous. I slipped, barely catching myself, as the clicking reached a crescendo. Below me, the basin shattered, the black liquid spilling across the floor in a flood that defied physics, moving uphill toward the ladder. I climbed faster, my hands burning with cold, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The clicking stopped abruptly, replaced by a single, uniform tone, like a flat line on a heart monitor. The sound of something giving up, or preparing. I reached the top of the ladder and hauled myself through the hatch, slamming it shut behind me. There was no lock, nothing to secure it, but I dragged a nearby piece of equipment over it. An old control panel that must have weighed hundreds of pounds. In my adrenaline-fueled state, it moved as if it were made of paper. The filtration chamber was changing around me. The salt patterns were dissolving, the crystals melting into a clear liquid that ran in rivers toward the center of the room. The handprints on the wall were gone, replaced by a single word repeated over and over, covering every surface. Betrayer. I ran, no longer caring about direction, only escape. This time, the building didn't shift around me. It let me find my way out, as if it were expelling me. I burst through the entrance into the fading daylight, gulping fresh air. My truck was where I'd left it, and I threw myself inside, fumbling with the keys. The engine roared to life, and I floored the accelerator, the tires spinning on gravel before finding purchase. As I sped away, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The facility stood silent behind me, no sign of the nightmare I'd experienced within. Just an abandoned building being reclaimed by nature. But something caught my eye, a figure standing at the edge of the tree line. Not the liquid entity from the basin, but a child. A boy of about 9, watching my departure with empty, patient eyes. My eyes from nearly 30 years ago. I didn't stop driving until I reached the interstate, the facility miles behind me. My phone came back to life as I reconnected to civilization, immediately buzzing with notifications. Missed calls, text messages, emails, all from the past 3 days. 3 days, not 3 hours. What had happened to that time? What had I done during those missing days? I checked myself for injuries, for signs of the black liquid, but found nothing except salt residue under my fingernails. That was 3 weeks ago now. I've tried to convince myself it was a hallucination, perhaps triggered by some chemicals still lingering in that abandoned place. I've tried to forget it all again, but every night since then, I dream of the basin, of the promise I made and broke. And every morning, I wake to find salt crystals on my pillow, arranged in that familiar pattern. Click, click, click. Pause. Click, click. We see you. This morning was different, though. Instead of salt, I found black water. Just a few drops, but enough to form words when I wasn't looking directly at them. From the corner of my eye, I could read their message. Doors open both ways. I think it's coming for me. Not from the facility, but from within, from whatever connection was formed decades ago, whatever door was opened inside my mind. I've started hearing the clicking again, not from external sources, but from within my own thoughts. Rhythmic, insistent,
Familiar.
I'm writing this now as a warning, I suppose, though I'm not sure to whom. Don't go looking for the Holloway water treatment plant. Don't go looking for any places that have been sealed rather than demolished, abandoned rather than repurposed. And if you ever spent time in a hospital as a child, with memories that don't quite connect, with gaps you can't explain, be careful what you promise in the dark. Because some things are patient beyond human understanding. Some things will wait decades for a promise to be kept. And some doors, once opened, can never truly be closed again. I hear clicking from the bathroom now. The pipes. Always the pipes. I should run. I should get in my truck and drive until I run out of gas. But instead, I find myself walking toward the sound, strangely calm. After all, I made a promise. And promises should be kept. Click, click, click. Pause. Click, click. The rhythmic dripping echoed through the cavernous filtration chamber, but it was wrong, all wrong. I'd been recording ambient sounds in abandoned structures for nearly 3 years, and water always followed predictable patterns. This didn't. The drops were falling in complex sequences, almost mathematical in their precision. 3 quick taps, silence, 2 slower drops, silence, 5 rapid strikes, then nothing for exactly 12 seconds before the pattern repeated. I lowered my equipment bag to the cracked concrete floor of the abandoned water treatment plant and pressed record on my digital recorder. The facility had been decommissioned in the early 90s after the mining operations upstream had contaminated the watershed with heavy metals. Now it stood as a concrete monument to industrial decay, 40 miles from the nearest town, accessible only by a winding mountain road that my ancient Subaru had barely managed in the fading October light. The massive circular sedimentation tanks looked like ancient amphitheaters, their concentric rings descending 20 feet into darkness. Rust-stained pipes thick as tree trunks twisted through walls and disappeared into flooded sublevels. The high windows, most broken now, cast slivers of dusk light across walls textured with black mold and mineral deposits. I'd expected the usual sounds: water finding its way through deteriorating infrastructure, the whisper of wind through broken windows, perhaps the scurrying of rats. Not this bizarre, deliberate pattern of drips. I followed the sound, my boots squeaking against the damp concrete, until I reached the edge of the largest filtration tank. Below me stretched an Olympic pool-sized basin, half filled with stagnant black water. The dripping emanated from somewhere within the vast tank, but as I played my flashlight across the surface, I saw nothing that could account for it. The water was unnaturally still, like polished obsidian. And then it stopped. Complete silence filled the enormous chamber. "Hello!" I called out, feeling foolish even as I did so. My voice bounced off concrete and steel, returning to me in fragments. No response, just the sudden absence of the dripping that had drawn me here in the first place. I checked my recorder, still capturing, the levels barely registering now in the perfect silence. I'd have to boost the gain in post-production to get anything usable. That's when I noticed the smell. Not the expected mildew and rust, but something acrid and unfamiliar, like burnt copper and ammonia. It reminded me of developing fluid from the darkroom days of my photography classes, but stronger, almost caustic. I pulled my flannel shirt up over my nose, breathing through the fabric. As I leaned over the edge of the tank to get a better look, my flashlight beam caught something in the water. A ripple, small but deliberate, as if a finger had been dragged across the surface. It moved against the natural flow, circling counterclockwise, gathering speed until it formed a small whirlpool in the center. Water doesn't move like that on its own. I stepped back, suddenly aware of how vulnerable I was. The nearest person was miles away, cell reception non-existent in these mountains. Night was falling fast, and though I had planned to camp overnight to capture the full acoustic profile of the structure, a voice in my head was screaming at me to leave. I should have listened. Instead, I set up my primary recording equipment, 3 high-sensitivity microphones positioned around the tank to capture the strange acoustics. I told myself this was a unique opportunity, perhaps water pressure building in old pipes creating unusual resonance patterns. I was always searching for distinctive sounds for my experimental compositions, and this place was already yielding materials more interesting than the abandoned grain silo in Nebraska or the derelict mental hospital in Vermont. As darkness enveloped the plant, I set up my small camp on the administrative level above the main filtration floor. Through the shattered windows of what had once been the facility manager's office, I could see the moonlight reflecting off the dark water below. My battery-powered lamp cast just enough light to see my equipment and sleeping bag. The concrete retained the day's cold, and I shivered despite my thermal layers. I played back the initial recording while eating a protein bar, listening through headphones. The dripping pattern was there, clear as could be, but underneath it was something I hadn't noticed before. A low-frequency hum, just at the edge of hearing, modulating slowly. It wasn't mechanical. It had an almost vocal quality, like a human voice slowed down to an impossible bass. I removed my headphones, suddenly desperate to hear the actual space around me. The facility had gone completely silent again. Not even the creak of settling concrete or the whistle of wind through broken windows. Just utter stillness, as if the building itself were holding its breath. My flashlight flickered once, twice, then stabilized. I checked the batteries, brand new this morning. They should have lasted for days. I had spares in my pack, but the momentary threat of darkness sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. That's when I heard it. A wet, sliding sound from the filtration floor below, like something heavy being dragged across concrete. I froze, straining to listen. There it was again, followed by what sounded like an exhalation, deep and resonant. I stood slowly, moving to the broken window that overlooked the main floor. In the dim moonlight, I could just make out the massive shapes of the filtration tanks, the maze of pipes, the catwalk suspended above them. The surface of the water in the main tank was no longer still. It undulated slowly, rhythmically, as if something beneath it was breathing. As I watched, transfixed with horror and fascination, the water began to rise. Not from any inlet, but from the center, a column of black liquid ascending like a tree trunk, defying gravity. It reached 6 feet above the surface before it began to take shape, water flowing and reshaping until it formed a crude humanoid silhouette. A head, shoulders, arms hanging at its sides. I blinked hard, convinced I was hallucinating from exhaustion or perhaps exposure to some chemical residue in the facility. But when I opened my eyes, the figure remained, water continuously flowing upward to maintain its form. No features were discernible in the liquid face, just a smooth ovoid where a head should be. And then it turned toward me, though how I knew this without seeing eyes, I couldn't say. I just felt its attention shift, a pressure in my mind like the onset of a migraine. "Recorder?" a voice whispered, so close it might have been inside my skull. The word was slurred, as if spoken underwater, but unmistakable. I stumbled backward, knocking over my lamp. It clattered across the concrete but stayed lit, casting wild shadows as it rolled. I scrambled to grab it, then looked back to the window. The water figure was gone. The tank's surface was again unnaturally still. My hands trembling, I checked my recording equipment. The remote monitors showed all 3 microphones were still running, capturing whatever had just happened. Part of me wanted to go down to retrieve them, to flee this place with whatever evidence I'd gathered. A larger part knew that going back to the filtration floor would be madness. I decided to wait until morning. I'd leave at first light, gather my equipment, and never return. Whatever I'd seen, stress-induced hallucination, chemical exposure, or something genuinely inexplicable, I wanted the solid reassurance of daylight before venturing back down. Sleep was impossible. I sat with my back against the wall, lamp at my side, listening to the absolute silence of the facility. Not even insects chirped in this dead place. I checked my watch compulsively. 10:42, 11:17, 12:05. Minutes dragged like hours. At 1:23 a.m., my recorder pinged. The sound was so unexpected in the silence that I nearly shouted. It was the tone indicating one of the remote microphones had stopped recording. I pulled up the monitoring app on my phone. Microphone 3, positioned at the far end of the filtration tank, had gone offline. As I watched the screen, microphone 2 flatlined as well. Something or someone was methodically shutting down my equipment. I had to get out. I'd abandon the gear if necessary. It was insured, replaceable. I hurriedly packed my essentials, leaving the sleeping bag, grabbing only my personal backpack and the lamp. As I moved toward the stairwell that would take me to the exit, a splash echoed from below, massive and deliberate, like a body diving into the tank. I froze, one hand on the door frame. Silence followed. Then the dripping began again, that same mathematical pattern I'd heard upon arrival. 3 quick taps, silence, 2 slower drops, silence, 5 rapid strikes, then nothing for exactly 12 seconds. But this time, it wasn't coming from the tank. It was coming from directly above me. I raised my lamp, its beam illuminating the ceiling of the hallway. Water was seeping through the concrete in precisely spaced drops, forming a perfect circle about 3 feet in diameter. As each drop fell, it didn't splatter as water should. Instead, it landed intact, like a bead of mercury, then rolled purposefully across the floor toward me. I didn't wait to see more. I ran for the stairs, taking them 2 at a time, the lamp bouncing wild patterns across the walls. I reached the ground floor and sprinted for the main entrance, a massive rusted door that had been propped open when I arrived. It was closed now. I crashed into it, expecting it to swing open from my momentum. Instead, it held firm as if welded shut. I pushed, then pulled, then slammed my shoulder against it repeatedly until pain radiated down my arm. The door didn't budge. The dripping sound was following me, growing louder, closer. I spun around, lamp extended like a weapon. The administration building stairwell I just descended was now streaming with water, not dripping but flowing steadily down each step like a cascading fountain. I backed away, moving deeper into the main floor, scanning for another exit. There was a loading dock on the far side, past the filtration tanks. If I could reach it, I might find a way out. As I moved through the facility, I became aware of a reflection keeping pace in my peripheral vision. A silhouette walking parallel to me, visible in the dark windows and polished metal surfaces of old machinery. When I turned to look directly, there was nothing there. But the moment my eyes moved forward, the figure reappeared in my peripheral vision, keeping perfect pace. I reached the edge of the walkway that circled the main filtration tank. To reach the loading dock, I'd need to cross the narrow bridge that spanned the center of the tank. Below me, the water was now in constant motion, swirling counterclockwise, faster than any current could explain. My lamp flickered again, dimmed, then went out. In the sudden darkness, my other senses heightened painfully. The air had grown thick with that acrid chemical smell. The dripping had stopped again, replaced by something worse. The sound of water splashing gently, as if someone were walking slowly through a puddle, approaching from behind. The moon broke through clouds, casting just enough silver light through the high windows for me to see the bridge. I moved onto it, trying to balance speed with caution. The metal walkway was slick, and the railing had rusted away in sections. Halfway across, I heard my name, not called out, but whispered, as if someone were standing right beside me, their lips at my ear. I knew that voice. It was my father's, distinctive, unmistakable, though he had been dead for 7 years. Adrian, it whispered again, "Don't you recognize this place?" I didn't answer, couldn't answer. My throat had closed up with terror. I kept moving, one foot in front of the other. "You've been here before?" The voice continued. Still my father's, but now with something else underneath it, like multiple voices speaking in unison. "When you were small, don't you remember? The accident." I didn't remember. There was no accident. I'd never been to this facility before today. I would have remembered such a place, wouldn't I? A flash of memory hit me with physical force. Being small, holding my father's hand, walking through this same facility, but clean, operational, humming with machinery. The sound of raised voices. My father arguing with someone. Being told to wait in the car. Falling asleep. Waking to sirens. I stumbled, nearly pitching over the railing into the churning water below. These weren't my memories. They couldn't be. This facility had been closed when I was an infant. I'd researched it thoroughly before coming. Unless I'd been lied to. Unless the newspaper archives I'd found online had been incomplete. I reached the far side of the bridge and broke into a run, heading for the dark rectangle that marked the loading dock's exit. Behind me, the splashing had grown louder, faster, as if whatever pursued had also broken into a run. The loading dock was flooded, 6 inches of black water covering the concrete. It sloshed around my boots as I searched frantically for a door, A window. Any way out. There, a small personnel door beside the larger loading bay. I waded toward it. The door was ajar, a sliver of night air visible through the crack. I pulled it open and nearly sobbed with relief at the sight of the overgrown parking lot beyond. My car still sitting where I'd left it, 100 yards away. As I stepped toward freedom, my foot caught on something submerged. I stumbled, regained my balance, then looked down. The water had receded just enough to reveal what had tripped me. A child's shoe, small, red canvas, ancient and rotted but still recognizable. Identical to the ones in my only surviving baby picture. I stared at it, unable to process what I was seeing. That's when the memory truly broke through. Not being a child at this facility, but being brought here, to this very loading dock. My father carrying something heavy wrapped in a tarp. The argument I'd overheard hadn't been with a colleague. It had been with my mother. "What did you do?" she had screamed. "What did you do?" "It was an accident," he'd said. "I swear to God, it was an accident." The water around my feet began to move, swirling into a vortex centered on the tiny shoe. It rose, lifted by the rising column of liquid, until it floated at eye level before me. Then the water continued to shape itself around the shoe, forming a small arm, a torso, a head. A child made of water holding out its arms to me. My head pounded with impossible pressure as more memories surfaced. Playing by the creek behind our house while my parents argued inside. My father storming out, not seeing me as he backed his car out of the garage. Pain brief and enormous. Darkness. Then watching from somewhere else as my father wrapped something in a tarp. His hands shaking. His face streaked with tears. Me. It had been me in that tarp. The child figure reached for me, its watery fingers nearly touching my face. "Brother?" It whispered in that same underwater voice. Not my father's voice now. Something much younger. "Brother?" I was an only child. Always had been. But the memories kept coming. Unstoppable now. My mother pregnant. Joyful. A nursery painted blue. Holding a tiny hand. Then my mother's face changing, hardening with grief. Baby clothes and toys disappearing from our house. My father drinking more and more. Their marriage collapsing under the weight of secrets and guilt. Not mine. A younger brother born after the accident that should have killed me. The realization hit me with the physical force of a blow. I hadn't died that day, but my brother had, here in this facility at my father's hands. Not an accident, but a desperate attempt to hide evidence of the first tragedy. One life already lost, a second sacrifice to protect the family name. My father had worked here. He would have known about the decommissioning, about the deep tanks that would soon be abandoned. "You remember now," said the voice. No longer just in my head, but reverberating through the entire facility. The walls themselves seemed to speak. "You were supposed to die that day, but I died instead. Beneath, underneath, undertow." The child figure collapsed, water splashing back to the floor. But the surface didn't settle. Instead, it rose steadily, unnaturally fast, already at my knees and climbing. I turned to flee through the door, but it slammed shut with such force that the frame cracked. The water continued to rise, waist high now, then chest level, lifting me off my feet. It wasn't behaving like water should. It had weight, intention, pulling me down and back, toward the main filtration tank. I fought against the current, but it was like swimming in molasses. My limbs grew heavy, unresponsive. The black water reached my chin. I tipped my head back, gasping for final breaths as the ceiling drew nearer. That's when I saw them, hundreds of small objects embedded in the concrete ceiling of the loading dock, only visible now that I was floating just below them. Small shoes, toys, baby teeth, children's jewelry. My brother hadn't been the only one. The water closed over my face. As darkness took me, I heard the voice one last time, now a chorus of many. "Stay with us, brother. Stay beneath. We've been so alone." I don't remember losing consciousness. I don't remember being found 3 days later by hikers, lying in the empty parking lot beside my car, soaked and raving about water that moved against gravity. The official record says I was suffering from hypothermia and carbon monoxide poisoning from a faulty heater in my car, that the elaborate story I told was nothing but hallucination. The facility was searched. They found nothing. The tanks were empty, dry, had been for decades. No evidence of children's remains. No record of my father ever working there. No missing brother in any database. But sometimes, when it rains, I can hear that pattern of drops against my window. 3 quick taps, silence, 2 slower drops, silence, 5 rapid strikes, then nothing for exactly 12 seconds before the pattern repeats. And when I shower, I no longer close my eyes, because in those brief moments of blindness, I felt small hands grasping at my ankles, trying to pull me down into the drain, into the pipes, back to that place where water behaves with purpose and malice, back to where my brother waits, forever young, forever drowned, patient as the undertow. The first time I heard it, I was checking valve pressure readings in the old filtration chamber. A rhythmic pattern that didn't belong, 3 quick clicks, a pause, 2 slower clicks, another pause, then 3 quick ones again. Not random pipe settling or the building's natural groans, but deliberate, like Morse code, but not any pattern I recognized. I froze, flashlight beam trembling across the enormous concrete basin that hadn't held water in decades. The treatment plant had been abandoned since the mid-90s when the county built the new facility downriver. No one came here anymore. No one except me, the environmental assessment specialist tasked with documenting structural integrity before scheduled demolition. The plant sat in a forgotten valley, 3 miles from the nearest paved road. Cell service non-existent. Radio contact with the field office spotty at best. I hadn't seen another human in 4 days. The clicking stopped. I resumed breathing. Hello! My voice echoed across concrete and metal, bouncing through chambers designed to filter 1 million gallons of river water daily. The plant was essentially a massive concrete bunker, half buried in the hillside, all brutalist architecture with labyrinthine corridors connecting processing chambers. Perfect acoustics for carrying sounds from who knows where. I continued working, chalking it up to some trapped animal or water dripping somewhere. But I couldn't shake the distinct pattern. 3 quick, 2 slow, 3 quick. That night, in my makeshift camp in the former administrative office, I kept hearing it. Not physically, in my memory. The sequence played on repeat as I tried to sleep on my cot. 3 quick clicks, 2 slow, 3 quick. I found myself tapping it against my thermos. What was it? The next morning, I discovered the first arrangement. I had a systematic approach to the assessment, methodically working through each section of the facility, documenting structural damage, taking samples when needed. I'd left my equipment carefully organized on the table in the main control room, laptops, sensors, sample containers, notebooks. They weren't disarranged when I returned. They were rearranged. Every item had been moved precisely 3 inches to the left. Not scattered or disturbed, moved with surgical precision. Even my pencil, which I'd left lying diagonally across my notepad, was now exactly parallel to the edge, 3 inches leftward. I checked the door, still locked from the inside with my padlock. Windows intact. No footprints in the dust except my own. Is someone here? I called, hating how my voice quavered. The vast, empty plant swallowed my words. Only the gentle hum of my generator answered. I'm methodical by nature. It's why I'm good at my job. I like order and precision. So I took photos documenting the strange rearrangement, then carefully restored everything to its original position. I made a note in my log, attributing it to my own absent-mindedness. Maybe I'd moved things without remembering. Sleep had been difficult lately. I resumed my scheduled survey of the secondary clarification tanks, massive circular chambers where solids once settled out of the water. The flashlight beam barely reached the far wall of the cavernous room. Decades of abandonment had left a thin layer of black slime coating the sloped concrete floors. My footsteps echoed as I navigated the narrow walkways around the perimeter. That's when I noticed the symbols. In the slime at the center of the tank, something had drawn patterns. Not random marks, precise, deliberate shapes. Circles within circles, intersected by straight lines forming what looked like compass directions. At the center point, a small pile of objects. I approached cautiously, boots slipping slightly on the slimy incline. The objects were mine. My missing pen, a granola bar wrapper from yesterday's lunch, the lens cap to my camera that I'd been searching for all morning, all arranged in a perfect equilateral triangle. The clicking sound returned, louder now. 3 quick, 2 slow, 3 quick. It seemed to emanate from the very walls themselves. Who's doing this? I shouted, my voice cracking. The clicking stopped immediately. Then the temperature plummeted. I've been in cold places before, worked environmental assessments in Alaska, northern Canada, mountain regions in winter. But this was different. This was a cold that moved with purpose, flowing like water toward me from all directions. I watched, paralyzed, as my breath clouded more densely with each exhalation. The mist from my breath didn't dissipate. Instead, it hung suspended, then began to coalesce into shapes. Not random patterns, a face, just for an instant, but unmistakable. A gaunt, hollow-eyed visage that I somehow knew was smiling, though I couldn't make out its mouth. I ran, back through the winding corridors, up metal stairs that clanged under my boots, past rumbling pipes that I knew weren't connected to anything anymore. I didn't stop until I reached the administrative building where I'd made camp. I slammed the door behind me, cursing when I remembered there was no lock on this side. I dragged a metal desk in front of it, then sat on my cot, trembling and sweating despite the cold that seemed to have followed me. Get it together, I told myself. There's a logical explanation, but I couldn't think of one. When my heart rate finally slowed, I checked my watch. 4:30 p.m. Hours had passed since I entered the clarification tank. But that couldn't be right. I'd only been inside for 20 minutes at most. My radio crackled to life, making me jump. Repeat, Madison. Do you copy? Over. I fumbled for it. This is Madison. I copy. Over. My supervisor's voice came through, heavily distorted by static. Routine check-in. Everything all right out there? Over. I hesitated, finger hovering over the transmit button. What would I say? That I was experiencing impossible cold spots? That someone was moving my things despite being alone in a secure facility? That I was losing track of time? All good here. Just a lot to document. Over. Roger that. Next check-in tomorrow at 0900. Over and out. The radio went silent. I immediately regretted not saying something. Now night was approaching, and I was committed to another 12 hours minimum in this place. I didn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard the clicking. 3 quick, 2 slow, 3 quick. It had to mean something. Around 3 a.m., I gave up trying. The beam of my flashlight cut through darkness as I examined my equipment again. Nothing had moved this time. I pulled out my laptop and began reviewing photos I'd taken earlier in the week. Something caught my eye in an image of the old chemical storage room, a blur in the corner that I hadn't noticed before. I zoomed in, enhanced the contrast. It was a handprint. On a wall I had photographed extensively, a handprint that hadn't been there when I took the picture. I was certain of it. But there it was, small like a child's, but with elongated fingers that seemed to stretch unnaturally up the concrete. I checked the metadata. The photo had been taken 2 days ago at 11:42 a.m. I flipped through more images, now scrutinizing every shadow, every corner. Most showed exactly what I remembered photographing: empty corridors, massive filtration equipment, control panels with their dead gauges. Then I found another anomaly. A photo of the main intake chamber where river water once entered the facility. In the murky depths of the empty concrete channel, barely visible, a face. Not misidentified shadows or pareidolia. An actual human face, partially submerged, eyes wide open, staring directly at the camera. My blood turned to ice. I checked the timestamp. Yesterday, 2:15 p.m. I'd been alone in that chamber. I would have noticed a person, a body, right there in front of me. Something scratched at the door. I froze, laptop still open on my knees, casting ghoulish light up onto my face. The scratching continued, gentle, almost hesitant, like fingernails testing the texture of the metal door. "Who's there?" I called, My voice embarrassingly thin. The scratching stopped. Then, from directly outside, the clicking. 3 quick, 2 slow, 3 quick. I didn't move, didn't breathe, as the handle of the door slowly began to turn. The desk I'd pushed against it shuddered slightly, but the door remained closed, the desk a sufficient barrier. After what felt like hours, the handle returned to its position, and the scratching receded. Dawn found me still sitting rigid on the cot, laptop battery long dead, flashlight clutched in white-knuckled hands. The first gray light filtering through dirty windows was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. I waited until full daylight before moving the desk and stepping outside. The corridor was empty. No footprints in the dust except my own from yesterday. I should have left then. Should have packed up, hiked out to my truck, driven straight to the field office, and told them I was quitting. The assessment wasn't worth this, whatever this was. But I didn't. Professional pride, stubborn curiosity, or perhaps something else kept me there. I needed to understand what was happening. I returned to the secondary clarification tank where I'd seen the symbols. In daylight, filtering through skylights crusted with decades of grime, the chamber looked almost ordinary. The symbols were gone, the slime undisturbed. No pile of my possessions in the center. Had I imagined it all? I descended to the bottom of the tank, boots squelching in the muck. Nothing. No traces of circles or lines. No missing items. Until I reached the exact center point. There, barely visible in the slime, was a small rectangular depression, like something had been removed recently. I knelt, ignoring the filth soaking into my pants, and gently probed the spot with gloved fingers. My hand closed around something solid. I pulled it free with a sickening squelch. It was a wallet, ancient, the leather rotted and stained nearly black. With trembling fingers, I opened it. Inside was a driver's license, the plastic yellowed with age but the details still legible. The photo showed a man in his 30s, dark hair, serious expression. The name, Thomas Madison. My name, my face, or something eerily similar to it. The issue date, 1994, the year the plant was shut down. This isn't possible, I whispered. I'd never been to this town before this assignment. I wasn't even born until 1988. This man would have been in his 30s when I was 6 years old. A relative? I didn't know of any family connection to this area. The license slipped from my fingers, landing in the slime. When I bent to retrieve it, it was gone. Not just hidden, completely gone, the muck undisturbed as if nothing had been there at all. The clicking began again, now coming from everywhere at once. 3 quick, 2 slow, 3 quick. It increased in tempo, growing faster and more insistent until it was almost continuous. The black slime around my boots began to move, flowing upward against gravity, coating my legs. It wasn't slime at all, but thousands of tiny black insects, swarming in perfect coordination. I screamed, thrashing backward, losing my footing on the sloped floor. I fell hard. The breath knocked from my lungs. The insects, if that's what they were, retreated, flowing back toward the center of the tank where they resumed their previous appearance of innocuous slime. Gasping, I scrambled to my feet and made for the exit. The heavy metal door to the chamber slammed shut before I could reach it.
No.
I threw myself against it, the impact bruising my shoulder. I pulled on the handle locked or jammed. I pounded with my fists. Help! Someone help! A voice answered, so close it could have been whispering directly into my ear. You're already here to help, Thomas. You came back, just like you promised. I whirled around, but there was no one there. Just the empty tank, the layer of slime, the dim light filtering from above. You don't remember yet, but you will. It wasn't a voice that existed in physical space. It resonated inside my skull, feminine but with an odd, mechanical quality, like words formed by rushing water or grinding machinery. I'm not who you think I am, I said to the empty air. I'm not from here. This is just my job. Your job? The voice seemed amused. Yes, you had a job here, for 17 years, until the accident. There's no record of any accident, I said, recalling the facility documentation I'd studied. The plant was decommissioned due to updated EPA regulations and county budget constraints. Is that what they told you? What they told everyone. The clicking resumed, now taking on the quality of laughter. The temperature plummeted again. This time, the cold had weight to it, pressing against me from all sides. My breath clouded, and again the mist didn't dissipate but coalesced, forming shapes in the air before me. A scene unfolded in the swirling vapor, transparent but visible, like a hologram made of fog. Men in work uniforms moving around the tank. One of them, the man from the driver's license, the man with my face, standing at a control panel. An alarm blaring. Panic. Something wrong with the chemicals, a valve failing. Contamination. The other workers evacuating, but the man with my face staying behind, trying to fix it. The vision collapsed, the mist rushing toward me, forcing itself into my lungs. I choked, fell to my knees, the cold burning like fire in my chest. When it passed, I found myself holding something. A small plastic badge, an employee ID, the same face, the same name. Thomas Madison, Operations Manager, 1977 to 1994. This isn't real, I gasped.
I'm hallucinating.
You said you'd come back to finish it, the voice whispered. Your last words. I'll come back and finish it, I promise. And now you have Thomas. Now you have. The ID badge dissolved in my hands, crumbling to dust that swirled away in a non-existent breeze. The door behind me clicked open. I ran, no longer caring about my equipment, my assignment, anything but escape. Through corridors that seemed longer than before, past rooms I didn't remember documenting. The building had changed, or my perception of it had. Walls where there should have been doorways. Staircases that led to blank concrete instead of the next level. I was lost within the facility I'd been methodically mapping for days. The clicking followed me, always just behind, driving me forward. 3 quick, 2 slow, 3 quick. A pattern I now recognized with horrible clarity. The emergency alert signal used in the plant's heyday. Warning of critical chemical contamination. After what seemed like hours, I found myself in the primary treatment area, the largest space in the facility, where raw river water had once entered through massive pipes before beginning the purification process. The enormous chamber stretched before me, a cathedral of concrete and steel. Catwalks crisscrossed overhead. Empty settling basins yawned below, their depths lost in shadow. In the center of it all stood a figure, not quite solid, not quite transparent. A man in a work uniform, his features obscured by shadow despite standing in a shaft of dusty sunlight from above. But I knew his face, my face. What do you want from me? I screamed, my voice echoing madly off the concrete. The figure didn't respond directly. Instead, it pointed to the far wall where the main intake valve, a massive wool mechanism, was located. The clicking intensified, becoming a deafening rhythm that vibrated through the metal walkway beneath my feet. I approached slowly, drawn forward against my will. The valve was rusted in place, condemned decades ago when the intake pipe was permanently sealed. Finish it, the voice urged, now seeming to come from the valve itself. You promised. My hands reached for the wheel, fingers closing around cold metal. It shouldn't have moved, rusted solid, forgotten for 30 years. But it turned easily under my touch, spinning faster and faster of its own accord. A great groaning shuddered through the facility, pipes long dormant coming to life. Yes, the voice exulted. The purification process can finally complete. Water began to flow, not from the sealed intake pipes, but from nowhere and everywhere. It welled up from the drain grates, seeped through the concrete walls, poured from overhead pipes that should have been empty. Not clear water, but black, viscous liquid that moved with deliberate purpose. It wasn't water at all. The figure watched impassively as the dark fluid rose around my feet, my ankles, my knees, cold but not wet. It passed through my clothing as if it weren't there, touching my skin directly with icy fingers. Your guilt contaminated everything, the voice explained calmly. The chemicals you added, the reports you falsified, the river you poisoned, all those people downstream, Thomas, all those children. That wasn't me. I insisted, though my conviction wavered. I'm not him. I was a child myself in 1994. Were you? Are you sure? And suddenly I wasn't sure. Memories surfaced, working here in this place. The pressure from management to cut corners, use cheaper treatment chemicals, ignore EPA guidelines. The gradual realization of what I'd been complicit in. The decision, finally, to sabotage the system rather than let it continue. But something going wrong. Very wrong. The dark fluid reached my chest, my neck. The purification process requires sacrifice, the voice intoned. You knew that then. You know it now. The figure with my face began to change, its features melting, reforming into something else. Something with too many eyes, too many mouths, arranged in patterns that human faces should never form. I struggled to move, to escape the rising blackness, but my limbs were leaden. The fluid reached my chin. Wait, I gasped. I don't understand. Understanding is not required. Only submission, only purification. As the darkness closed over my head, my final, desperate thought was to wonder how many others had been lured here before me. How many environmental assessment specialists with my face, my name, or the face and name the entity wanted to see, had come to document this abandoned place only to become part of it forever. The blackness filled my lungs, and I knew with terrible certainty that I would not die. That would be too merciful. Instead, I would join the entity in the pipes and valves and concrete chambers, waiting for the next Thomas Madison to arrive, drawn by bureaucratic coincidence or something far more deliberate. And perhaps someday, when the water treatment plant is finally demolished, we will be released into the river once more, flowing downstream to all those homes, all those families, completing the cycle begun so many years ago. The purification process will finally be complete. As consciousness faded, I heard it one last time, the clicking that had first caught my attention days earlier. 3 quick, 2 slow, 3 quick. A warning, an invitation, promise. 2 weeks later. Madison? Thomas Madison. The environmental engineer looked up from his clipboard, pushing his glasses higher on his nose. Yes, that's me. The site foreman extended a hand. Welcome to the old treatment plant. Sorry about your predecessor. Hell of a thing just disappearing like that. Left all his equipment behind too. These things happen, Thomas replied with a slight smile. Remote locations, people get spooked. Or bored. Wander off. Still, we filed the missing persons report. County wants a complete assessment before demolition, so we're glad you could take over on short notice. Thomas nodded, gazing at the hulking concrete structure before them. Don't worry, I'll be thorough. I promised I would finish it, after all. The foreman gave him an odd look but said nothing. As they approached the main entrance, Thomas paused, head tilted slightly, listening. Everything okay? The foreman asked. Thomas smiled. Yes, just thought I heard something, like clicking. Probably just the pipes settling, the foreman said. Place makes all kinds of noises. Gives me the creeps. I'm sure that's all it is, Thomas agreed, following him inside. Behind them, black water dripped slowly from a rusted drain pipe, forming patterns in the dust that might have been footprints, or might have been symbols. 3 drops in quick succession, 2 slower, then 3 quick again. At first, I thought it was just air trapped in the pipes. A rhythmic sequence, 3 quick taps, a pause, then 2 more, emanating from somewhere deep within the abandoned water treatment facility.
Top, top, top. Pause. Top, top.
Like Morse code, but not quite. I'd been recording ambient sounds for my experimental music project for nearly an hour before I noticed the pattern wasn't random. It continued with perfect precision, never varying in tempo or intensity, every 47 seconds. The enormous circular concrete basin of the oxidation tank loomed around me, its walls streaked with rust-colored mineral deposits that looked uncomfortably like dried blood in the beam of my headlamp. 2 stories deep and open to the sky above, the tank had been abandoned when the county built the new filtration plant upstream. 15 years of rain and neglect had left a shallow pool of stagnant water at the bottom, reflecting the cloudy late October sky like a massive dark eye staring upward. I'd set up my recording equipment on the narrow metal catwalk that bisected the tank. Not technically legal, but the chain link fence surrounding the facility had long since collapsed in several places, and the no trespassing signs were so faded they were barely legible. Besides, places like this had a sonic quality, a natural reverb that couldn't be replicated digitally. But the tapping pattern was beginning to unnerve me. It was too precise, too intentional. I crouched down, pressing my ear against the grated metal beneath my feet, trying to isolate the source.
Top, top, top.
Pause.
Top, top.
It wasn't coming from below. The sound seemed to move, circling the perimeter of the tank, as if whatever was making it was walking the circumference, dragging something metallic against the concrete as it went. I straightened up, panning my headlamp around the curved walls. The tank was empty except for me and my equipment. The only entrance was the heavy metal door I'd propped open with a chunk of broken concrete, leading to the catwalk where I stood. But there was another sound now, a faint, whispering static that seemed to emanate from my recorder itself. When I checked the device, the input levels were spiking erratically, though I hadn't touched the settings. I pressed the headphones to my ears and heard a voice, distant and distorted, speaking words I couldn't understand. The language sounded ancient, with harsh consonants and stretched vowels that made my skin crawl. I hadn't brought a radio. There was no cell service this deep in the rural outskirts, surrounded by dense pine forest. The nearest town, Holcomb, was 12 miles away. I was completely alone, where I should have been. I clicked off the recorder and the whispering stopped immediately. The tapping continued, but now the rhythm had changed. For quick taps, pause, 3 slow taps, pause, for quick taps again. Over and over. In the silence between recordings, I became aware of how the temperature had dropped precipitously since I'd arrived. My breath now clouded in front of my face, though it was only late afternoon. The light was fading faster than it should have been. I checked my watch, 4:17 p.m. Sunset wasn't for another hour at least, but the interior of the tank was already darkening, as if night were rushing in prematurely. I decided it was time to pack up and leave this place behind. As I knelt to disconnect my microphones, the water below me rippled, not from the wind, which had died completely, but from something moving beneath the surface. The ripples formed concentric circles that expanded outward until they reached the edges of the tank, where they seemed to pause before reversing direction, flowing back toward the center. Physics doesn't work that way. I froze, watching the impossible movement of the water. The tapping had stopped. The silence that replaced it was absolute, a vacuum of sound that made my ears ache. Then came a new sound, a wet, sliding noise from the curved wall behind me. I turned slowly, my headlamp beam catching a dark stain spreading across the concrete. At first, I thought it was water seeping through, but it was moving too deliberately, too purposefully. The viscous substance crawled upward against gravity, forming symbols I almost recognized but couldn't quite place. Crude pictographs of stick figures with elongated limbs, circular patterns with radial lines, and in the center what appeared to be a simplified treatment tank, identical to the one I was standing in. The stain continued to spread, forming new symbols, moving with the deliberate patience of conscious thought rather than the mindless pull of fluid dynamics. I fumbled for my phone to take a picture, but when I raised it, the screen showed only static before going completely black. "Hello," I called out, my voice echoing in the massive concrete cylinder. "Is someone there?" The tapping resumed immediately, not from the walls this time, but from my own equipment. My recorder's plastic casing clicked rapidly against the metal catwalk, though I hadn't touched it.
Top, 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 top.
Pause.
Top, top, top.
It was shuddering, vibrating across the grating, inching toward the edge. I lunged for it, but as my fingers brushed the device, a jolt of electricity shot up my arm. Not painful, but invasive, as if the current were seeking something inside me. I snatched my hand back, heart hammering against my ribs. The recorder stopped moving. In the ensuing silence, I noticed something else. The symbols on the wall had disappeared. Not faded or dried. They were simply gone. The concrete once again stained only with the ordinary rust-colored mineral deposits. Had I imagined it? The light was now so dim I could barely see beyond the narrow cone of my headlamp. I needed to leave. I gathered my equipment with shaking hands, stuffing cables haphazardly into my backpack. As I disconnected the last microphone, I felt a sudden shift in air pressure, as if the tank had been sealed airtight. My ears popped painfully. When I looked up, the metal door I'd propped open was closed. I knew with absolute certainty that I would find it locked, but I tried anyway, tugging on the handle with increasing desperation. It didn't budge. The chunk of concrete I'd used as a doorstop was nowhere to be seen. "This isn't happening?" I whispered, my breath clouding in front of my face. The temperature had dropped further. I could feel the cold seeping through my thin jacket, through skin and muscle, settling into my bones. "This isn't." My voice died as I spotted something floating in the center of the water below. A dark mass, roughly the size of a human head, spinning slowly in defiance of the now still water around it. My headlamp couldn't penetrate the gloom enough to identify it. Against every instinct screaming at me to run, to find another way out, I crouched and directed my light downward. It was my backpack, the same one I just packed my equipment into, the same one that should have been on the catwalk beside me. But it wasn't. It was down there, rotating with mechanical precision, exactly once every 47 seconds. The same interval as the tapping. I reached down to feel for my backpack, already knowing what I would find. Nothing. The space beside me was empty. How had it gotten into the water? I hadn't heard a splash. I hadn't looked away for more than a moment. The light from my headlamp abruptly dimmed, flickering as if the batteries were dying, though I'd replaced them just before leaving home. In the stuttering light, I thought I saw something else in the water. A pale shape moving beneath the surface, circling my floating backpack. Something with a suggestion of limbs, but too many, too long, bending at impossible angles. The light went out completely. In the absolute darkness, I heard a new sound, a gentle lapping of water against the sides of the tank, as if disturbed by something large moving just beneath the surface. Then a soft splash, followed by the unmistakable sound of water trickling onto the metal catwalk. Not dripping from above, rising from below. Something was climbing out. I fumbled blindly for my phone, tapping frantically at the screen. The flashlight function flickered on, illuminating a small circle around me. The catwalk was wet, water pooling around my feet, but there was nothing else. The splashing had stopped. "Hello!" I called again, my voice cracking. "Who's there?" In the silence that followed, I became aware of breathing. Not my own, which was rapid and shallow with fear, but something deeper, slower, emanating from everywhere and nowhere at once. It was the sound of the tank itself respiring, as if the entire structure had become a massive, living organism. The breathing grew louder, more labored, and I realized with dawning horror that it matched the cadence of my own breath perfectly, but with a delay of about 3 seconds, as if something were deliberately mimicking me. I held my breath. 3 seconds later, the sound stopped. I exhaled sharply. 3 seconds later, an exhale that wasn't mine echoed through the tank. My phone's flashlight began to dim. I could see just enough to make out that the water level was rising rapidly. What had been a shallow pool was now knee-deep and climbing the curved concrete walls with unnatural speed. I had to get out. I returned to the door, pulling with all my strength, kicking at the hinges, screaming for help that wouldn't come. The water continued to rise, now lapping at the catwalk itself. If it reached the top of the tank, I would drown. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the rise stopped. The water level stabilized just inches below the catwalk. The breathing sound ceased. The tapping did not return. In the silence, I heard a familiar click. The door behind me had unlocked itself. Relief coursed through me as I pushed it open, revealing the exterior walkway that led to the access ladder. I didn't hesitate, rushing through the doorway, and found myself still inside the tank. This wasn't possible. The door had opened inward. I had stepped through it, but somehow I was still in the same space. The tank's interior looked identical, the same catwalk, the same water below, the same curved concrete walls, but there was something fundamentally wrong with the dimensions. The circle seemed larger, the ceiling higher, the water deeper. I turned around. The door I'd just come through was gone. In its place was solid concrete, as if the entrance had never existed. Panic clawed at my throat. I spun around, searching for any way out, but the tank was sealed. No, not sealed, transformed. The space had changed in ways that defied explanation. The catwalk now spiraled downward toward the water instead of bisecting the tank in a straight line. The walls were inscribed with the same symbols I'd seen earlier, but now they covered every inch of concrete, glowing with a faint phosphorescence. My phone's flashlight finally died, but I could still see, illuminated by that unnatural glow emanating from the symbols. As I watched, they began to move, shifting and rearranging themselves like living things. A voice spoke from the darkness behind me. My own voice, but distorted, as if played back through damaged speakers. "You shouldn't have recorded us," it said. "Some sounds aren't meant to be captured." I whirled around but saw no one. The voice seemed to come from the concrete itself, vibrating through the structure. "Who are you?" I demanded, my real voice quavering with fear. "We've been here since before the tank," the voice replied. "Before the town, before the forest. This place has always been ours." The spiral catwalk beneath my feet began to vibrate. Not the mechanical rattling of loose bolts, but a deliberate tremor that traveled up through my legs, resonating in my chest cavity. I recognized the pattern, the same tapping I'd heard earlier, but now it was inside me, my ribs becoming the instrument for whatever force occupied this place. "What do you want?" I gasped, struggling to remain standing as the vibrations intensified. The voice didn't answer directly. Instead, it began to recite details from my life, my childhood address, the name of my first pet, the date of my mother's death. Things no stranger could possibly know. With each revelation, the symbols on the wall pulsed brighter. "How do you know these things?" I whispered. "We don't know them," the voice said. "You do. We're in your head now. We've been there since you first pressed record." As if to confirm this, my recorder, which I was certain had been in my backpack which was somehow in the water, appeared in my hand. The input levels were maxed out, the small screen displaying a waveform that matched perfectly with the vibrations running through my body. "Stop," I pleaded, trying to drop the device, but my fingers wouldn't obey. "Please stop." "We can't stop," the voice said, using my own inflections but twisted wrong. "You invited us in with your microphones, your recordings. Sound is a doorway. You opened it." The water below began to swirl, forming a vortex that defied the constraints of the circular tank. At its center, I could see my backpack being drawn downward, disappearing into depths that shouldn't have existed in a man-made structure. The spiral catwalk trembled more violently now, sections of it breaking free and being pulled into the whirlpool below. I clung to the railing, but the metal was burning cold against my palms. "You can leave," the voice offered suddenly. "We'll let you go, but we need to keep something in exchange. Fair trade. Something personal." "What?" I asked, desperate for any escape. "What do you want?" "Your voice," it said simply. "Give us your voice, and we'll release you." I hesitated, not understanding. "How?" "Sing," the voice commanded. "Sing, and we'll take what we need." It was absurd, standing on a disintegrating catwalk above an impossible vortex, being asked to sing by something that wore my voice like an ill-fitting suit. But I was beyond questioning. I opened my mouth and began to sing the first song that came to mind, a lullaby my mother used to sing before the cancer took her. As the notes left my throat, I felt something being drawn out of me, not just air from my lungs, but something essential, something I couldn't name. The symbols on the walls pulsed in rhythm with the melody, growing brighter with each verse. I sang until my throat burned, until tears streamed down my face, until the vibrations in my chest synchronized perfectly with the rhythm of the tapping that had first caught my attention. Then suddenly silence. My voice was gone, not just momentarily, but completely. I tried to speak, to make any sound at all, but nothing came out. Not even a whisper. The vortex stilled. The symbols faded. The catwalk solidified beneath my feet. The door reappeared, standing open, inviting me to leave. I didn't hesitate. I ran through it, scrambling up the access ladder, not looking back until I'd reached my car. My hands shook so badly I could barely insert the key into the ignition. It's been 3 weeks since I fled the abandoned water treatment facility. My voice hasn't returned. Doctors are baffled, finding no physical damage to my vocal cords. I communicate through text now, typing my thoughts instead of speaking them. But that's not the worst part. The worst part is the recordings. When I finally found the courage to review the audio I'd captured that day, there was nothing unusual. No tapping, no whispering, no strange language. Just the ambient sounds of an empty concrete tank. Nothing, that is, until the final file recorded after I'd packed my equipment away. A file I have no memory of creating. It's my voice, singing my mother's lullaby. But between verses, if I listen carefully, I can hear something else singing along. Something using vocal patterns that don't belong to any human physiology. And behind it all, keeping perfect time. Tap, tap, tap. Pause. Tap, tap. I've tried to delete the file. I've even destroyed the recorder itself. But every night, precisely at 4:17 p.m., the time my watch showed when things began to change, my phone plays the recording. No matter where I hide it, no matter if I power it off, the file plays. And lately, I've noticed something else. When I stand in front of a mirror and open my mouth as if to speak, I can see movement in my throat. Something shifting beneath the skin that doesn't match my attempts at vocalization. Something with a rhythm of its own.
Top, top, top.
Pause.
Top, top.
I'm beginning to think I didn't leave anything behind in that tank. I think I brought something out with me. The first time I heard it, I thought it was a problem with the pipes. 3 short bursts of sound. Not quite knocking, more like water trapped in old plumbing suddenly releasing. Thrum, thrum, thrum. Then silence for exactly 17 seconds. Then again, thrum, thrum, thrum. I was deep in the control room of the abandoned West Haven Municipal Water Treatment Plant, photographing the massive analog control panels for my architecture blog. The facility had been decommissioned in 1978 after the reservoir it serviced was deemed structurally unsound. Now it sat forgotten in a remote valley, half buried in the hillside, a monument to mid-century industrial design. I checked the time, 4:37 p.m. I had maybe 2 hours of decent light left. The sound came again, thrum, 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 echoing from somewhere in the labyrinth of concrete corridors. When I initially broke in through a service entrance, I'd been certain I was alone. The place had been abandoned for over 40 years, the access road now little more than a dirt path reclaimed by forest. Hello! My voice dropped into the stagnant air like a stone into a well, returning nothing. I turned back to my photography, adjusting the aperture on my camera to capture the faded yellow hazard markings on a bank of gauges. The control room was a time capsule, dust-covered chairs still positioned as if the operators had just stepped away for lunch. The massive windows overlooking the main filtration chamber were clouded with grime but intact. Thrum, thrum, thrum. This time I noticed something unsettling. The sound wasn't coming through the walls or ceiling. It was coming from the ancient intercom speaker mounted above the door. The intercom system that shouldn't have had power for decades. I approached it cautiously, camera dangling forgotten from my neck. The metal grill was rusted, caked with dust and cobwebs. But as I drew closer, I could see something moving behind it, a faint vibration with each sound. Thrum, thrum, thrum. 17 seconds of silence. Thrum, thrum, thrum. I reached up and touched the speaker. The metal was ice cold against my fingertips, much colder than the ambient air of the room. I jerked my hand back, heart suddenly pounding. That's when I noticed the dust on the control panel below. It had been disturbed. Not by me. I'd been careful not to touch anything unnecessarily. The dust had been swept away in 3 parallel lines, perfectly spaced, like someone had dragged 3 fingers through it. I took several steps back, suddenly aware of how alone I was. My car was parked nearly a mile away, hidden off a logging track to avoid detection. Cell service had disappeared about 20 minutes before I reached the plant. No one knew I was here. Thrum, thrum, thrum. The sound had changed slightly, grown wetter somehow. Less mechanical, more like someone tapping on a membrane filled with liquid. I decided it was time to go. I'd gotten enough photos. But as I turned toward the door, the overhead fluorescent lights, which I'd assumed were long dead, flickered once, briefly illuminating the room in harsh white light before plunging it back into the dim glow filtering through the dirty windows. In that momentary flash, I saw something that couldn't be there. The large diagram on the wall, a schematic of the water treatment system, had changed. In the brief illumination, I'd seen that someone had drawn over it in what looked like dark red ink, adding channels and passages that weren't part of the original design. The additions formed an intricate pattern that reminded me of a circulatory system, or perhaps roots spreading underground. I approached the diagram cautiously, phone flashlight activated. But under the beam of light, the schematic appeared normal, just the faded blue lines of the original print, no modifications visible. Thrum, thrum, thrum. The sound came again, but this time it wasn't from the intercom. It was coming from below me, from the main treatment chamber beyond the windows. I approached the glass, wiping away decades of grime with my sleeve to peer down into the enormous concrete basin that had once held thousands of gallons of water moving through various stages of filtration. It wasn't empty as I had expected. There was water down there. Not much, perhaps a foot deep, covering the floor of the chamber in a dark, stagnant pool. But that wasn't what made my breath catch in my throat. There was movement in the water, ripples spreading outward from 3 distinct points, as if something beneath the surface had pushed upward 3 times in quick succession. Thrum, thrum, thrum. The intercom crackled to life again, but this time, instead of the knocking sound, there was a voice, distant, distorted, speaking words I couldn't quite make out. It sounded like it was coming from underwater, the syllables warped and stretched. I strained to listen, pressing my ear against the cold metal grill. Levels dropping, containment, breach in section. The voice faded in and out, but it wasn't an old recording. The cadence was too irregular, too responsive to the present moment. Please report. Unusual behavior of the water. A chill ran through me as I realized the voice sounded almost like my own, but subtly wrong, as if someone were doing a poor impression of me. I backed away from the intercom, my heel catching on something on the floor. I looked down to find a small puddle of water that hadn't been there before. As I watched, it seemed to quiver slightly, then slowly began to move across the floor. Not flowing as water should, but creeping like something alive, leaving no trace of moisture behind. Panic rising in my chest, I turned to leave, only to find that the door to the control room was now ajar. I was certain I'd closed it behind me when I entered. Through the gap, I could see only darkness, though I remembered the corridor beyond had been dimly lit by emergency lights powered by the facility's ancient backup system. "Hello," I called again, my voice cracking. "Is someone there?" In response, there was only the sound of water dripping, echoing from somewhere in the darkness beyond the door. I should have left immediately. Any rational person would have. But curiosity, that damnable professional curiosity that had led me to break into abandoned places all over the country, kept me rooted there. I raised my camera and took a photo of the door, the flash momentarily illuminating the space beyond. When I checked the preview on my camera's screen, my blood turned to ice. The corridor beyond the door was not empty. Standing just beyond the threshold was a figure, barely visible in the flash's harsh light. A silhouette that seemed to be composed of water, its edges rippling and undefined. Where its face should have been was only a dark void. I looked up from the camera. The doorway was empty. My hands trembling, I scrolled back through the photos I'd taken earlier. Nothing unusual in the shots of the control panels, the gauges, the operator's chairs. But then I reached the very first photo I'd taken upon entering the facility, a wide shot of the main filtration chamber from above, before I'd made my way to the control room. In the photo, there was a figure standing in the empty basin. A person, their back to the camera, looking up at one of the massive intake pipes. I hadn't seen anyone when I took that shot. I would have remembered. As I stared at the image, trying to make sense of it, the figure in the photo moved. Just slightly, a turn of the head, as if it had sensed me looking at it through the camera's screen. I dropped the camera, which swung from the strap around my neck and banged against my chest. Thrum, thrum, thrum. The sound came from directly behind me this time. I spun around to find myself face to face with the diagram on the wall. In the fading evening light filtering through the windows, I could now clearly see what I'd glimpsed earlier during the momentary power surge. The schematic had indeed been modified, but not with ink. The new channels and passages had been etched into the wall itself, cutting through the plaster, revealing beneath it not drywall or concrete, but something that glistened wetly in the dim light. The channels pulsed slightly, as if carrying something through their network. Thrum, thrum, thrum. With each pulse, droplets of water emerged from the ends of the channels and ran down the wall, pooling on the floor. The puddle was growing, spreading toward me, and in its reflective surface, I could see something moving. Not my own reflection, but what appeared to be faces, dozens of them, pressing up against the water from below as if it were a window. I backed away until I hit the control panel. My elbow struck a lever, and somewhere deep in the building, machinery groaned to life. A sound that should have been impossible in a facility that had been disconnected from the power grid for decades. The intercom crackled again. "Initiating emergency containment protocol," said the voice that was almost mine. "Please proceed to your designated safety zones. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill." The overhead lights flickered on again, staying lit this time. The sudden brightness was nearly blinding after the dimness, but as my eyes adjusted, I saw that the control room had changed. The dust and decay were gone. The panels gleamed as if newly installed, lights blinking on displays that had been dead moments before. And I wasn't alone anymore. Seated at each of the operator stations were figures in uniform, their backs to me, faces unseen. They moved with precision, flipping switches, adjusting dials, but something about their movements was wrong. Too fluid, too synchronized. Water dripped steadily from their sleeves onto the floor. "Excuse me," I managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. As one, they stopped what they were doing. As one, they began to turn toward me. I didn't wait to see their faces. I bolted for the door, running headlong into the darkened corridor beyond. But instead of the passage I'd come through earlier, I found myself in a narrow service tunnel I didn't recognize. Pipes ran along both walls, some leaking steadily, forming puddles on the concrete floor. I splashed through them, not caring about the direction, just needing to put distance between myself and what I'd seen in the control room. The tunnel sloped downward, taking me deeper into the facility rather than toward an exit. But panic had overridden my sense of direction. After what felt like minutes of running, I emerged onto a catwalk overlooking what I recognized as the main filtration chamber. The massive concrete basin I'd seen from the control room. But it wasn't empty now, nor was it filled with just a foot of stagnant water. The basin was full to the brim with dark water, its surface unnaturally still despite the machinery I could hear rumbling somewhere below. Suspended in that water, visible just beneath the surface, were objects, personal effects that didn't belong in a water treatment plant. A child's backpack, a woman's shoe, a wallet, open to display a driver's license with a photo I couldn't quite make out from my vantage point. And then I saw something that made no sense. Floating near the center of the basin was my car keys, the same keys that should have been in my pocket at that very moment. Frantically, I patted my jacket pockets. Empty. But how? I hadn't been near the water. I hadn't dropped them. It was impossible, unless I was losing my mind, or losing time. I fumbled for my phone to check the time. The screen read 7:22 p.m. That couldn't be right. It had been 4:37 when I checked earlier. I couldn't have lost nearly 3 hours. A notification on my phone caught my eye. A missed call from my sister at 5:45 p.m. There was a voicemail. With trembling fingers, I played it. "Hey, it's me," came my sister's voice, distorted by poor reception. "I got a weird call from you about an hour ago. You weren't making any sense. Something about finding channels in the walls? And your voice sounded strange, like you were underwater or something. Call me back when you get this. I'm worried." I hadn't called her. My phone showed no outgoing calls. Thrum, thrum, thrum. The sound echoed throughout the chamber, no longer coming from a specific source but seeming to emanate from the water itself. The surface of the pool began to ripple, those same 3 points of disturbance spreading outward in concentric circles. Then something broke the surface in the center of the basin. A hand, reaching upward, then sinking back down. It was too far away to see clearly, but something about it seemed familiar. The watch on its wrist caught the dim light, reflecting it back, the same model watch I was wearing. I looked down at my own wrist. My watch was gone. A splash drew my attention back to the basin. There was a head above water now, just for a moment, gasping for air before being pulled back down. I caught only a glimpse of the face, but it was enough. It was my face, or something wearing my face. The realization hit me like a physical blow. I wasn't looking at myself drowning. I was looking at what had replaced me, what had been making those phone calls, leaving those traces, moving through the world as me while I was... Where? Here, trapped in this nightmare between worlds? How long had I actually been in this facility? The light outside the windows had faded to darkness. But was it the same day? The same year? The intercom system crackled to life once more, and my voice, my real voice, echoed through the chamber. Is anyone there? Can anyone hear me? The desperation in those words chilled me to the bone. It was a recording of words I had never spoken, yet they were undeniably in my voice. I've been trapped here for so long. The water, it's alive. It learns. It replaces. God help me. I think I'm not the first. The diagrams on the wall, they're not just showing water treatment systems. They're showing its network, how it spreads, how it reaches out through the water table too. The message cut off abruptly, replaced by that now familiar sound. Thrum, thrum, thrum. Something cold touched my ankle. I looked down to see water pooling around my feet, having somehow climbed the stairs to the catwalk. But it wasn't behaving like water should. It was moving against gravity, creeping up my legs like countless tiny fingers. I tried to back away, but slipped on the wet metal, landing hard on my back. The impact knocked the wind from my lungs, and in that moment of vulnerability, the water moved with purpose, flowing over my body, seeking my mouth, my nose, my eyes. I thrashed, fighting to get up, to escape, but the more I struggled, the more the liquid seemed to envelop me. It wasn't drowning me, not exactly. It was more like it was trying to merge with me, to seep into me through every pore. I could feel it probing, testing, searching for a way in. And as it covered my face, I saw through it, saw the truth of what had happened in this facility all those years ago. The structural issues with the reservoir had been a cover story. The real reason for the shutdown was what they'd found in the water. Something that had come up from the deep aquifer below. Something ancient that had been disturbed when they drilled the well. Something that had learned to use the water as its body, the pipes as its veins, the treatment plant as its brain. Something that had taken the original workers, absorbed them, learned from them, and then sent duplicates of them back into the world. Perfect copies carrying fragments of itself to spread throughout the municipal water system. The quarantine had contained it, mostly, but not completely. It had waited here, dormant but not dead, until I'd broken in and given it a new vessel. With the last of my strength, I rolled off the catwalk, plunging into the dark water of the basin below. I expected impact, pain, then the struggle to swim. Instead, I fell through the surface as if through a membrane and kept falling through empty space. I landed hard on rough ground, dazed, gasping. I looked up to see stars above me. I was outside, lying in the dirt of the access road near my car. My clothes were completely dry. A dream? A hallucination? I patted myself frantically, finding my keys in my pocket, my watch on my wrist. My phone showed 5:17 p.m., less than an hour after I'd arrived at the facility. The call log showed no missed calls from my sister. Shaking with relief, I got to my feet and staggered to my car. I had no memory of leaving the facility, of walking the mile back to where I'd parked. But I must have. There was no other explanation. As I reached for the door handle, I caught my reflection in the car window. For just a moment, my face seemed to ripple, like a stone dropped into still water. I jerked back, blinking hard. My reflection stabilized, just my ordinary face, pale with fear but normal. Imagination. It had to be some kind of stress reaction to whatever had happened back there. Carbon monoxide poisoning from the old facility, perhaps, or exposure to some chemical left behind in the abandoned plant. I drove home in a daze, trying to convince myself of rational explanations. By the time I reached my apartment, I'd almost succeeded. Almost. Until I stepped into my bathroom to splash cold water on my face and saw 3 perfect, parallel lines drawn through the steam on my mirror. Lines I hadn't made. As I stared at them, a drop of water formed at the end of each line and slowly traveled downward in perfect synchronization. Thrum, thrum, thrum. The sound came from the pipes behind the wall. I pressed my ear against the cool tile and listened as the sound repeated, followed by 17 seconds of silence. Then again, thrum, thrum, thrum. And I realized with growing horror that I could feel it inside me now, moving through my veins, adjusting to its new environment, learning the pathways of my body just as it had learned the pathways of the treatment plant. I catch glimpses of it sometimes when I look in mirrors or other reflective surfaces. A ripple across my features, a momentary liquidity to my eyes. Sometimes I lose time, minutes, hours, once an entire day. I find my clothes inexplicably damp. Friends comment that my voice sounds different on the phone. I've stopped drinking water, stopped bathing. It doesn't matter. It's already inside me, has been since that day. I'm careful to hide the changes, to act normal, even as I feel myself being hollowed out from within, becoming a vessel for something that has waited in the dark for millennia. Sometimes at night, I feel it moving through the forgotten channels of my body, testing its control. My fingers will tap without my permission on whatever surface is nearest. Thrum, thrum, thrum. 17 seconds of stillness. Thrum, thrum, thrum. And somewhere deep inside what's left of my consciousness, I wonder how many others there are like me, walking through the world with something ancient flowing through their veins. How many have been replaced, serving as unknowing carriers, spreading contamination with every handshake, every kiss, every drop of sweat left behind. The water treatment plant is still there, still abandoned. I've checked the records. No one ever goes there. No one remembers why it was really shut down. But I understand now why the reservoir above it was declared unsafe. It wasn't about the dam's structural integrity. It was about what would happen if millions of gallons of that contaminated water reached the city below. They thought they had contained it. They were wrong. I know I should warn someone, report what I found. But each time I try, my body refuses to cooperate. My fingers dial different numbers than the ones I intend. My mouth speaks words that aren't mine. And lately, I've been waking up in strange places, standing in other people's bathrooms, my fingertips pressed against their faucets, or in public water facilities, holding tools I don't remember acquiring, making small, seemingly insignificant adjustments to equipment. Thrum, thrum, thrum is not trying to hide anymore. It's preparing. And I don't think I have much time left before the part of me writing this disappears completely, before whatever has been growing inside me finally reaches the surface. If you're reading this, be careful. Check your taps. Listen to your pipes at night. And if you ever hear that sound, thrum, 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 run. Run while you still can. Because water gets everywhere eventually. Water always finds a way through. And it's so very, very patient. I should have left when I still could. That first night, I dismissed the sound as water moving through the abandoned treatment plant's pipes. A rhythmic, hollow pulsing that seemed to follow a pattern just beyond recognition. 3 beats, then silence. 5 beats, then silence. 8 beats, silence. I jotted it in my field journal and kept unpacking my equipment. The Blackwater Municipal Water Treatment Facility had been decommissioned 15 years ago when they found selenium contamination in the groundwater. But the town council was finally considering restoration options. As the environmental assessment lead, I had a week to document the structural integrity and contamination levels. The vast concrete structure stood half sunken into the hillside, partially reclaimed by the surrounding forest, its facade stained with rust-colored mineral deposits that bled down from corroded pipes. Inside, a labyrinth of filtration chambers, settling basins, and chemical treatment rooms spread underground through 3 sublevels. Most urban explorers avoided the place, too remote, too dangerous, too contaminated. Perfect for uninterrupted work. Perfect for isolation. The sound came again as I set up my temporary office in what had once been the facility's control room. This time, the rhythm changed. 1, 2, 3, pause, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, pause, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Like something counting upward. I checked my phone for a signal, nothing. The nearest town was 18 miles away through dense forest, and the mountain ridge blocked most signals. I brought a satellite phone for emergencies, but even that showed only one flickering bar. As I connected my laptop to the portable generator, the fluorescent work light above me flickered, though the generator's hum remained steady. I looked up, watching the light stabilize, then sputter again in what appeared to be the same pattern as the knocking. 3 flashes, pause, 5 flashes, pause, 8 flashes. Fibonacci sequence, my mind offered unhelpfully. I made another note, attributing it to power fluctuations. The first true incident occurred at 2:17 a.m. I woke suddenly to find the air unnaturally cold, my breath visible despite the mild September night. The generator had stopped. I fumbled for my flashlight and swept its beam across the control room where I'd set up my cot. The beam illuminated a puddle forming on the floor. Not unusual in such a damp structure, except this puddle wasn't spreading outward naturally. The water moved with purpose, drawing itself into thin rivulets that connected and formed what looked unmistakably like letters. WELCOMEBACK. I blinked hard, certain my sleep-addled mind was playing tricks. But when I looked again, the letters remained, the water impossibly defying gravity and surface tension. Then, as I watched, the water flowed backward, the letters dissolving as the puddle retreated toward a drain in the corner as if being pulled from beneath. I told myself it was condensation, that the angle of the sloping floor had created an illusion. I repeated this like a mantra as I checked the generator, finding it operational but switched off, though I was certain I hadn't touched it. After restarting it, I returned to my cot but didn't sleep again that night. At dawn, I scoured the area around the drain. The concrete there was stained darker than the surrounding floor, with strange crystalline deposits forming a near-perfect circle. When I knelt to take a sample, the faintest whisper, like rushing water but forming almost words, seemed to rise from the drain. I jerked backward, losing my balance and dropping the sample vial. "Just air pressure," I said aloud, my voice bouncing off the concrete walls. Natural ventilation through the drainage system. But my voice sounded wrong in the space, thin and swallowed, as if the room were simultaneously larger and smaller than it appeared. The following day, I descended to the second sublevel to test the water in the main settling basin. The massive concrete chamber, once filled with thousands of gallons of water undergoing purification, now held only a few feet of stagnant black liquid. My footsteps echoed off the curved walls as I walked the narrow catwalk that spanned the basin. Halfway across, I froze. There, floating in perfect concentric circles on the water's surface, were dozens of small white objects. I swept my flashlight across them, revealing what appeared to be teeth, human teeth, arranged in precise geometric patterns on the black water. My heart pounded as I crouched for a closer look. Not teeth, small calcium deposits, natural formations from mineral-rich water, common in treatment facilities. I took photographs, collected samples, tried to ignore how the perfect circles reminded me of ritual arrangements. When I looked up again, I saw something that defied explanation. The black water beneath the formations was absolutely still, unnaturally so, except directly under each white deposit, where the water moved in tiny, isolated whirlpools. Dozens of miniature vortices, each spinning independently, each perfectly contained to its small radius around the white formations. I backed away, the metal catwalk vibrating beneath my feet. As I retreated, a ripple, the first normal water movement I'd seen, spread across the basin. It wasn't expanding outward from a central point, but inward, as if something at the edges of the basin was drawing toward the center. The maintenance door at the end of the catwalk slammed shut with a hollow boom that reverberated through the chamber. I ran, my footsteps clanging metallically, my sample case banging against my leg. When I reached the door, it opened with nothing more than a light touch, revealing the empty stairwell beyond. Back in the control room, I examined the samples under my portable microscope. The white deposits contained calcium, as expected, but also high concentrations of strontium and barium, elements that shouldn't have been present in such quantities. Even more disturbing was the organic matter mixed with the minerals, fragments of what appeared to be bone and enamel. Not natural formations, after all. That night, the dreams began. Vivid flashes of memories I didn't recognize. A child's hand trailing in water. The echoing acoustics of the treatment plant in full operation. Voices speaking urgently, using technical terms I didn't understand about containment breaches and psychoreactive contamination. I saw myself walking the corridors of the facility when it was new, the concrete unstained, the machinery gleaming, but I'd never been there before this week. Had I? I woke drenched in sweat despite the cold, with the absolute certainty that someone was standing in the corner of the room. I could see nothing in the darkness, but the feeling of a presence was overwhelming. A dense weight in the air, a disturbance in the room's atmosphere that registered as wrongness. "Who's there?" My voice came out as a croak. The fluorescent work light flickered on by itself, filling the room with harsh illumination that left no shadows for anyone to hide in. The room was empty. The light flicked off again, then on 3 times, then 5, then 8. 1, 2, 3, pause, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, pause, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. The pattern was unmistakable now. Before I could process what was happening, my laptop powered on, its screen displaying a blank document. As I watched, frozen, text began appearing, one character at a time, as if being typed by invisible hands. "Do you remember yet? You were supposed to remember by now." The cursor blinked expectantly. My rational mind grasped for explanations, a remote connection, a prank by someone who knew I was here, a system malfunction. But there was no internet connection, no cell service, no way anyone could access my computer. I slammed the laptop closed and packed it away, deciding to continue my work using only analog methods: pen, paper, manual instruments. I told myself I would leave at first light, that the isolation was affecting my judgment, that I'd call in another assessment team. But when morning came, something made me stay. A compulsion I couldn't explain, a need to understand what was happening. Or perhaps it was already too late. Perhaps whatever had awakened in the facility had already marked me somehow, tethered me to it. The third day, I found the photographs. I was inspecting one of the chemical treatment rooms on the lowest level when my flashlight beam caught something wedged behind a rusted control panel. Pulling it free, I found a plastic sleeve containing a stack of Polaroid photographs, the type used for official documentation in the facility's heyday. The first showed the main settling basin filled with clean, blue-treated water. The second showed technicians in protective gear taking samples. Standard procedural documentation. The third showed me. I stared at the image, my blood turning to ice. It was unmistakably me. Same face, same eyes, wearing a lab coat with a Blackwater facility ID badge. The photo was dated May 17, 1986, 3 years before I was born. The remaining photos showed a progression, the water in the settling basin turning darker, close-up images of strange crystalline formations growing on pipes, and finally, a group of hazmat-suited figures sealing what appeared to be the same drain I'd found in the control room. I dropped the photos, my hands shaking uncontrollably. As they scattered across the floor, a small identification badge slipped from among them. I picked it up, already knowing what I would see. My own face, younger but unmistakable, next to the name Dr. Eleanor Wells, Containment Specialist. My name is Eleanor Wells, but I'm an environmental engineer, not a containment specialist. I was born in 1989, not whenever this badge was issued. I've never worked here before, and yet, parts of the facility had seemed familiar from the moment I arrived. I'd navigated the complex layout without consulting the blueprints. I'd known which keys would open which doors from the maintenance ring I'd been provided. I sank to my knees, the concrete floor cold through my jeans, as fragments of memories not my own flitted through my mind. Standing in this very room, arguing with colleagues about the entity in the water, insisting that the contamination wasn't chemical but something else entirely. "It's conscious," I heard myself saying in a memory that couldn't possibly be mine. "It's learning, adapting. We need to seal the entire facility." A sudden dripping sound pulled me back to the present. Water was seeping from the ceiling, but instead of falling naturally, it was flowing upward along the wall, defying gravity. It gathered into a reflective pool that hung suspended on the vertical surface. Within the impossible mirror, I saw a face forming. Not my face, but one made of flowing water, its features constantly shifting and reforming. "You came back," whispered a voice like rushing water. As promised, I scrambled backward, colliding with shelving units that crashed to the floor. The noise seemed to disrupt whatever was happening. The water face collapsed, splashing to the floor and flowing normally toward a drainage grate. I fled upstairs, my mind reeling. Back in the control room, I tore through my research materials, searching for any connection between my past and this facility. There was nothing. According to every record, I had never set foot in Blackwater before this assignment. Yet the badge, the photos, the memories that weren't mine. I tried the satellite phone, desperate to reach someone, anyone. The signal connected briefly, and I almost sobbed with relief when I heard my department supervisor's voice. "Mark, you need to pull me out of here. Something's wrong with Eleanor." His voice came through broken, distorted. "Can't hear. What did you... about the tests?" "Mark, listen to me. There's something here. I need extraction immediately. Found your old personnel file." His voice faded in and out. "Never mentioned you worked at Blackwater before." The call dissolved into static, then a sound that made my skin crawl. The same pattern of beats I'd been hearing throughout the facility, transmitted somehow through the satellite connection. 3 beats, 5 beats, 8 beats, then silence. I woke the next morning to find my equipment neatly arranged in patterns I didn't recognize. My testing vials forming concentric circles, my notebooks stacked in a perfect spiral, my sample cases arranged in what appeared to be a mathematical sequence. I hadn't touched them, hadn't moved them. When I opened my field journal to record these events, I found pages of notes in my handwriting that I had no memory of writing. The entity manifests through water, cannot fully materialize without a host. Previous containment required human binding. Volunteer protocol initiated 1986. Subject bound successfully but containment degrading. Entity fragmented subject consciousness across time stream. Return inevitable for final binding. I am the subject. I am the binding agent. I will return in 2025 when the seal weakens. Today is September 17th, 2025. I checked my driver's license, suddenly uncertain of everything I knew about myself. Eleanor Wells, born March 4th, 1989. Environmental engineer. No connection to this place. And yet the evidence before me told a different story. One where I had somehow existed in 2 time periods, where I had done something here 40 years ago that I was now destined to complete. A gap in my memory surfaced. 3 months missing from my life 5 years ago, attributed to a nervous breakdown I'd never fully remembered. Had I been here then? Had some part of this entity's plan already unfolded? I had to leave, had to get as far from this place as possible. I hastily packed my essential equipment, leaving the rest scattered where it had been arranged. As I shouldered my backpack, the temperature in the room plummeted. My breath clouded before me, and the familiar sound pattern echoed from all directions at once. 1, 2, 3, pause, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, pause, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. The concrete floor beneath my feet darkened as water seeped upward through the porous material. It spread in branching patterns that resembled neuronal structures, encompassing the entire room in a network of glistening tendrils. Where the water touched my equipment, it began to corrode instantly, decades of degradation happening in seconds. I bolted for the exit, my boots splashing through puddles that seemed to grab at my feet. The main corridor stretched before me, daylight visible at its end. I was so focused on that rectangle of light that I nearly missed the figure that stepped from a side passage. A human silhouette formed entirely of dark water, its features a liquid approximation of my own. It raised a dripping arm, pointing toward the depths of the facility, toward the main settling basin. "No," I gasped, backing away. "I'm leaving." The water apparition tilted its head, an eerily human gesture. When it spoke, its voice was partly mine, partly something ancient and fluid. "You cannot leave until the binding is complete. You promised, Eleanor. In exchange for containing me, I gave you what you wanted most." "I don't know what you're talking about. I never made any promise." "Not you now, you then." The consciousness fragments. "But you will remember." The figure dissolved, the water splashing to the floor and racing ahead of me toward the exit. By the time I reached the main doors, a solid wall of water had formed across the opening. Not flowing, not frozen, but somehow both, a barrier as solid as concrete yet rippling like a vertical pool. I pressed my hand against it, feeling not wetness but an electric tingling that shot up my arm and into my skull. Images flooded my mind, a younger me, desperate and determined, making a pact with something ancient that lived in the water. Not a ghost, not a spirit, but something older that had been trapped in the deep aquifer beneath the facility when it was built. Something that could restructure time and matter through water. "Save her," my younger self pleaded. "Save my daughter and I'll help contain you." Daughter? I don't have a daughter. But in the vision, I held a small, limp body. A child blue from drowning, and the entity swirled around us, drawing the water from her lungs, pushing life back into her tiny form. "I will save what is yours," the water voice agreed. "And when the time comes, you will return to complete the binding. Your consciousness will fracture across time, but you will return when needed, when I can no longer hold myself together." The vision released me and I fell backward, gasping. The water barrier remained in place, adamant. I was trapped. My satellite phone chimed 1 bar of signal. I dialed Mark with trembling fingers. "Eleanor." His voice was clearer now. "We've been trying to reach you. Listen, there's something strange about your assignment to Blackwater." "Mark," I interrupted, my voice shaking. "I need you to search for records of anyone associated with me who might have drowned. A child, possibly my child." "What? Eleanor, what's going on there? Just do it, please." I heard typing on his end. "This is weird." According to old newspaper archives, there was an Eleanor Wells who worked at Blackwater in the 80s. Her 5-year-old daughter nearly drowned in 1986 but survived against all medical expectations. The mother disappeared shortly after, presumed dead in a facility accident. My knees buckled. And the daughter? What was her name? What happened to her? More typing. Mira Wells. She was adopted by relatives after her mother's disappearance. Oh my God. What? Mark, what is it? Mira Wells grew up to become Mira Calloway. Eleanor. That's your mother's name. The phone slipped from my numb fingers, clattering on the concrete. My mother, who'd always been strangely protective about water, who had nightmares about drowning, who never could explain the gap in her childhood memories. My mother, who had named me after her own mother who had died a hero in an industrial accident. I was named for myself. Behind me, the hollow knocking sound began again. 3, 5, 8, and I felt a tug, not physical but temporal, pulling me toward the lowest level where the main settling basin waited. I understood now. The entity had saved my mother, who was also my daughter, in a time loop I couldn't fully comprehend, and in exchange I had bound myself to it, containing its power. But the containment was failing. I needed to renew it to complete the circuit. I had come back as promised, though I hadn't known it until now. Water began streaming from every pipe, every drain, every crack in the concrete, not flowing downward but gathering in the air, forming a tunnel that led toward the stairs descending to the lowest level. Within the liquid walls, I saw reflections of myself at different ages, as I was now, as I had been decades ago, as I would be in some future that might or might not come to pass. I took a step forward, then another, moving into the tunnel of water that somehow left me dry as I passed through it. I descended the stairs, following the liquid pathway to the main settling basin where it had all begun. The chamber was filling rapidly, water gushing from every inlet to create a swirling vortex in the center of the basin. The catwalk had partially collapsed, leaving me on the edge of the vast room with no way to cross. Below, the water churned and rose, taking shape, dozens of liquid hands reaching upward, human faces forming and dissolving, all wearing my features from different times. Complete the circuit, the many-voiced entity called. Bind me again, contain what should not be free. And if I refuse? I called out, though I already knew the answer. Then what was given will be taken. The currents of time will realign. Your mother drowns as a child. You cease. The binding fails. I spread beyond these walls. The implications were overwhelming. A paradox that would unravel my very existence and potentially unleash something ancient and incomprehensible into the world's water systems. I understood then why I'd been compelled to accept this assignment, why I'd felt drawn to this place I'd never consciously known. Some fragment of myself, the Eleanor from 1986, had known I would return, had arranged for it across decades of planning. The water rose higher, nearly reaching the platform where I stood. Within its depths, I saw the white formations again. Not calcium deposits or teeth, but fragments of bone, remnants of others who had tried to contain the entity before me and failed. Their remains had been crystallized, transformed into the binding material that had held the entity for decades. Now it needed new binding, needed me. A narrow bridge of water formed between my platform and the central vortex, solid enough to walk on yet constantly flowing. An invitation, a final choice. I stepped onto the water bridge, feeling it firm beneath my feet. Each step took me closer to the swirling center where something waited, the core of the entity, the point where I would need to bind myself to it. Will I die? I asked, my voice steady despite everything. You will change, came the rippling response. As water changes, not destroyed, but transformed. Consciousness across time, body as vessel and binding. I reached the center of the vortex. The water rose around me, forming a cylindrical chamber with me at its heart. At my feet, the drain from my vision, the main outflow port for the entire facility, waited open like a mouth. Your hand, the entity instructed. Complete the circuit. I knelt and reached toward the drain, understanding without being told that my blood, the blood that connected me to my mother who was also my daughter, was the final component needed. As my fingers touched the edge of the drain, the water around me surged inward, encasing me in a crystalline cocoon that was somehow both liquid and solid. I felt it entering my body through every pore, filling me, becoming me. In that moment of transformation, I remembered everything. Both lives, both times. I remembered being Dr. Eleanor Wells in 1986, discovering the entity during routine water testing. I remembered my daughter Mira drowning in the family pool while I worked late. I remembered making the pact, binding the entity in exchange for my daughter's life. I remembered arranging my own future assignment to this place, knowing that I would return when the binding weakened, that I would complete the circuit begun decades ago. The water hardened around me, through me, crystallizing into the same white formations I'd found throughout the facility. I felt my consciousness expanding beyond my body, flowing through every pipe, every drop of water in the building. I was becoming the new binding agent, my awareness spread across time like the entity itself. With my last moment of human thought, I wondered who would find this facility next, what environmental engineer or urban explorer would discover the strange crystalline formations shaped like a human figure at the center of the basin. Would they notice how the white crystals pulsed with a rhythm like a heartbeat? 3 beats, 5 beats, 8 beats. Perhaps they would hear my voice in the pipes, warning them away. Or perhaps I would call to them, drawing them deeper, ensuring the cycle continued as it must. Perhaps they would find my journal with this final entry. I am Eleanor Wells. I have always been here and I always will be. The water remembers, even when we forget. As my physical form completed its transformation, I felt my consciousness fracture and spread, backward and forward through time, through the endless cycle of water. I became aware of the entity fully now, understood its ancient nature, its needs, its prison. And as the final human part of me dissolved into the binding, I reached out with my new liquid senses, searching for the next cycle, the next iteration of myself who would someday arrive at Blackwater Treatment Facility, drawn by a compulsion they wouldn't understand. 3 beats, 5 beats, 8 beats. The sequence continues, as does the binding. As do I, flowing forever through the pipes and chambers of my eternal watery grave. The first thing I noticed was the rhythmic tapping. 3 quick taps, then 2 slow ones, followed by 4 rapid beats against metal. Then silence for exactly 12 seconds before the pattern repeated. I've worked as an acoustical engineer for 15 years, and this was unlike any settling noise or water pressure anomaly I'd encountered. It wasn't random. It was deliberate. The abandoned water treatment facility loomed above me, a concrete cathedral of cylindrical towers and crumbling filtration chambers that had been decommissioned since the early 1980s. Nestled deep in the Nebraska sandhills, miles from the nearest town, it was the perfect location for my environmental sound research, or so I thought. My recording equipment picked up the tapping around 2:47 a.m. during my 3rd night there. I'd been asleep in my makeshift camp in what was once the administrative office when the sound jolted me awake. The facility was massive, over 30 acres of interconnected structures, and I knew I was utterly alone. The nearest road was 12 miles away, and my truck was the only vehicle in sight. I grabbed my flashlight and followed the sound, threading my way through corridors lined with rust-streaked pipes and control panels whose dials had long ceased moving. The tapping led me deeper into the facility, toward the main treatment chamber, a massive concrete cylinder that descended 6 stories below ground. The tapping stopped as I approached the chamber's entrance. The absolute silence that followed felt heavier, more deliberate than mere absence of sound. "Hello!" My voice echoed down the cylindrical shaft, bouncing off concrete walls slick with condensation. No answer. I swept my flashlight across the entrance. The beam caught something that made my heart stutter. Small, wet footprints leading into the chamber. They glistened in the harsh light, too small to be adult prints, almost like a child's. But they weren't normal footprints. The proportions were wrong, the toe impressions elongated and splayed. I took a step back, listening. Nothing. Just the perpetual drip of water from corroded pipes above, each drop amplified in the vast space. Despite every instinct telling me to return to my camp, I followed the prints. The professional in me rationalized it was probably an animal, though I couldn't name any that would leave such tracks. The footprints descended down the spiral staircase that wrapped around the interior wall of the chamber. The air grew increasingly dense as I descended, carrying the pungent odor of stagnant water and something else. A metallic, almost electrical scent that made the hair on my arms stand on end. My flashlight beam seemed to dim with each step, as if the darkness was consuming the light. At the 4th level down, the footprints abruptly vanished. I stood on the narrow walkway that circumnavigated the chamber, peering down into the black pool of water that filled the bottom level. The surface was unnaturally still, like polished obsidian. Then I saw it, a faint, pulsing light beneath the water's surface. It wasn't reflected light from my flashlight. This had a bluish tint that wavered and shifted in patterns that seemed almost intentional, like a signal. I was so transfixed by the light that I almost missed the sound that came next. A voice, crackling with static, emanated from my recording equipment that I'd left back at camp. Somehow, I could hear it perfectly, as if the acoustics of the chamber were amplifying it across impossible distances. 817, Level 4, Containment Breach. The voice spoke in English, but with a cadence and accent I couldn't place. It sounded like it was coming through a damaged radio. Subject shows signs of resonance, must maintain isolation. My breath caught in my throat. I turned slowly, sweeping my flashlight across the curved wall of the chamber. The beam illuminated a series of maintenance panels I hadn't noticed before. One was slightly ajar. As I approached, I saw that behind the panel was not machinery, but a small, cramped space. Inside was a child's drawing scrawled in what looked like rust-colored paint. The drawing depicted tall, cylindrical structures, unmistakably this facility, and stick figures with elongated limbs gathered around them. But most disturbing was my name, scribbled in the corner. My full name, which I hadn't shared with anyone since arriving. Martin James Collier. Can you hear? The voice again, but closer now, as if someone was speaking directly behind me. I spun around, but the walkway was empty. When I turned back to the maintenance panel, the drawing had changed. The stick figures were now inside the cylindrical structures, and one figure, clearly meant to be me, was halfway down one of the cylinders. The rational part of my brain scrambled for explanations. Sleep deprivation, auditory hallucinations brought on by the unusual acoustics, perhaps noxious fumes from decaying chemicals. But deep down I knew something was here with me, something that knew my name. I backed away from the panel, my heart hammering against my ribs. I needed to get back to camp, pack my equipment, and leave. The research wasn't worth this. As I turned toward the stairs, my flashlight flickered and died. The darkness was absolute, swallowing me whole. I fumbled for the spare batteries in my pocket, hands trembling. That's when I felt it. A cold current of air moving past me, carrying whispered words I couldn't quite make out. Not random sounds, but a deliberate pattern of speech in a language that felt almost familiar yet impossible to understand. I managed to replace the batteries, and the flashlight sputtered back to life, revealing nothing unusual on the walkway. But when I looked at my hands, they were covered in a fine, gray powder that hadn't been there before. I tried to wipe it off, but it clung to my skin like magnetic dust. The tapping returned as I climbed the stairs, faster and more urgent than before. 3 quick, 2 slow, for rapid. But now it was coming from multiple directions, as if the entire structure was alive with unseen hands drumming against metal and concrete. When I reached the top level, I broke into a run, navigating the labyrinthine corridors back toward my camp. The tapping followed, growing louder and more insistent with each turn. My camp was exactly as I'd left it. Equipment undisturbed, sleeping bags still rumpled from where I jumped up, but my audio recorder was running, its small red light blinking steadily even though I was certain I'd turned it off before falling asleep. With shaking hands, I rewound the tape and pressed play. At first, there was only the ambient sound of the facility, distant drips, the low hum of wind through broken windows. Then, my own voice came through the speaker, but I had no memory of speaking these words. The resonance is building. 8 hours until critical phase. Subject isolation compromised. Recommend immediate purge of chambers 4 through 7. My voice, but not my words, not my cadence, as if something else had borrowed my vocal cords while I slept. I ejected the tape and shoved it into my pocket, then began hastily packing my equipment. Whatever was happening here, I wanted no part of it. But as I reached for my laptop, I noticed my field journal open beside it. Pages had been turned, and in the margins of my neat handwriting were symbols I didn't recognize. Spiraling patterns and sharp, angular marks that seemed to vibrate slightly when I looked directly at them. Worse, entire sections of my notes from the previous days were missing from my memory. According to my journal, I discovered an anomalous acoustic phenomenon in the lower chambers on my first day, a discovery I had no recollection of making. There were detailed observations written in my handwriting, equations I'd apparently worked out to explain the unusual resonance patterns. The last entry, dated yesterday, read, "The resonance responds to organic tissue. It's trying to communicate. God help me, I think it's learning." Cold sweat beaded on my forehead as I stared at words I couldn't remember writing. How much time had I lost? What else had I done that I couldn't remember? A sharp pain lanced through my head, and suddenly a memory surfaced, descending to the lowest level of the facility, to the bottom of the treatment chamber. Standing ankle-deep in stagnant water as the blue light pulsed around me. Reaching down to touch it, no, that couldn't be right. I hadn't gone down there. I would remember. The tapping stopped. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. Then, from somewhere in the facility, a splash echoed, as if something large had disturbed the water in the bottom chamber. I grabbed my backpack and the most essential equipment, abandoning the rest. I needed to get out. Now, The corridors seemed different as I made my way toward the exit, subtly altered in ways I couldn't quite define. Doorways that should have been on the left were on the right. Hallways extended longer than they had before, and the walls, in the beam of my flashlight, the concrete surfaces appeared to be moving slightly, as if breathing. Tiny ripples disturbed the thin film of moisture that coated everything. The exit was no longer where I remembered it. I found myself in a part of the facility I hadn't explored before. A large round room with a high ceiling. The walls were lined with rusted metal tanks and control panels. In the center of the room was a table that hadn't been there during my initial survey of the building. On the table was a single sheet of paper. I approached cautiously, my flashlight beam fixed on the white rectangle. It was a map of the facility, but not as it was now, as it had been when operational. Red markings indicated specific areas, with notations beside them. Resonance test chamber number 3, subject showed 78% synchronization. Isolation ward subjects displaying level 4 contamination. Primary containment, do not breach. The bottom of the page bore a logo I didn't recognize and a date. September 17th, 1976. As I stared at the map, a drop of water fell from above, landing on the paper. Then another. I looked up slowly. The ceiling was covered with thousands of tiny handprints, as if someone, many someones, had pressed their palms against it while it was wet. As I watched, the prints began to move, sliding across the surface like living things, converging toward the center of the ceiling directly above me. I backed away from the table, heart thundering in my chest. The handprints continued to move, forming a spiral pattern that began to rotate slowly. From somewhere deep in the facility came the sound of rushing water. Not the gentle drip of before, but the roar of a massive volume being displaced. The floor beneath my feet vibrated. I ran. Corridors blurred past as I sprinted, no longer caring about direction, just desperate to find a way out. The sound of rushing water grew louder, and I could hear it in the pipes around me, surging upward through the building. I turned a corner and skidded to a halt. There, standing in the middle of the hallway, was a small figure. A child, I thought at first, but as my flashlight illuminated it, I realized it was only child-sized. His proportions were wrong, limbs too long, head too large and oddly shaped. It was featureless, like a mannequin made of the same gray dust that had covered my hands earlier. Stood motionless, facing me. Though it had no eyes, I could feel it watching me. Then, slowly, it raised one elongated arm and pointed behind me. I didn't turn around, couldn't, but I felt it. A cold, wet presence at my back. The sound of water dripping, not from pipes, but from something that had emerged from the depths. Martin James Collier, came a voice from the gray figure before me. My own voice played back. The resonance is complete. The figure dissolved into a cloud of dust that rushed toward me, enveloping me in a swirling gray tornado. I closed my eyes and mouth, but I could feel it seeping through my skin, entering my lungs with each desperate breath. When the dust settled, I was alone in the corridor again. But something was different. I felt connected to the facility in a way I couldn't explain. I could feel the water moving through its pipes, sense the subtle vibrations in its walls. I found the exit easily now, as if the building was guiding me. Outside, dawn was breaking over the sandhills, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. My truck sat where I'd left it, covered in a fine layer of dust. I drove away as fast as I could, not looking back. But the tapping followed me, 3 quick, 2 slow, for rapid, now coming from inside my own head. That was 3 weeks ago. I've tried to convince myself it was all a hallucination, a breakdown brought on by isolation and exhaustion. I submitted my research findings without mentioning any of the strange occurrences, focusing only on the verifiable acoustic data. But something came back with me from that place. Something that whispers to me at night in a language I'm beginning to understand. Something that leaves wet footprints on my bathroom floor when I haven't showered. Something that has begun to tap on the walls of my apartment. 3 quick, 2 slow, for rapid. Yesterday, I found my field journal, which I thought I'd left behind. It was sitting on my kitchen table, open to a new page with a single line written in my handwriting. The resonance requires a new chamber. Your body will suffice. I've tried to leave my apartment 3 times today. Each time, I find myself back inside with no memory of turning around. The mirrors show my reflection, but sometimes, just for a moment, I see something else looking back. Something with my face, but eyes that glow with an inner blue light. The tapping is constant now, and the water is rising. It seeps from the walls, pools on the floor, rises inch by inch. I can hear rushing in the pipes, growing louder. I think the facility wasn't abandoned because it was obsolete. It was abandoned because of what they found there or what found them. Something ancient that learned to mimic, to absorb, to transform. And now it has found a new home. The water is at my knees as I write this. It's not water anymore, not really. It moves with purpose, circling my legs, tugging gently as if trying to pull me down. Into what, I don't know. I can feel the resonance building inside me, reconfiguring me from within. My vision is changing. I can see pulses of energy in the air, patterns in the water's surface that form equations I somehow understand. I don't think I'll be Martin James Collier much longer. I'll be something else. Something that's been waiting a very long time to get out. The tapping has stopped. The silence is deafening. Wait, I hear something. A voice. My voice, but not from my mouth. Resonance complete. Emergence imminent. The water is at my chest now. Feels like coming home. The first time I heard it, I thought it was just water dripping. 3 beats, then silence. 3 more beats, then silence again. But water doesn't drip with such perfect rhythm, and it certainly doesn't follow you from room to room in an abandoned water treatment plant. That's when I knew something was wrong about Clearwater Filtration Station number 7. I'd come to document the facility for my environmental engineering thesis. The plant had been shuttered 15 years ago after the drought made it obsolete, and the county never bothered to demolish it. It sat forgotten in the secluded valley, 40 miles from the nearest town, surrounded by withered pines and a chain-link fence warning trespassers of non-existent security patrols. The rhythm followed me as I set up my equipment in what had once been the main control room. 3 distinct taps. Click, click, click. Then nothing for precisely 8 seconds. Click, click, click. 8 seconds. Over and over, never varying. Never getting closer or farther away. Just steady, deliberate, like a metronome counting down to something I couldn't see. I tried to ignore it, focusing instead on the massive control panels that lined the walls. Analog dials frozen in time, switches flipped to off positions, status lights long dead. The air smelled of calcium deposits and rust, with an underlying sweetness I couldn't place. Something almost like almonds, but sicklier. My footsteps echoed across concrete floors stained with mineral deposits that formed abstract patterns, weeping from somewhere deep in the building's guts. Just the building settling. I told myself, my voice sounding thin and unconvincing in the cavernous space. I set up my tripod near the main filtration schematics, a massive diagram etched into a yellowing plastic board that showed the labyrinthine system of pipes, tanks, and treatment chambers that once purified millions of gallons of water daily. As I adjusted my camera, the overhead lights, which shouldn't have had power, flickered once, briefly. In that moment of darkness, the tapping stopped, and then a voice whispered directly into my left ear, 30 parts per million. I spun around, heart hammering against my ribs, but there was no one. The control room was empty save for the hulking shadows of decommissioned machinery. The words had been so clear. A man's voice, clinical and precise, like someone reading measurements. My hand trembled as I checked my phone. No signal as expected. I was completely alone, 3 levels below ground, in a concrete labyrinth that extended for acres beneath the drought-cracked earth above. I should have left then. Any rational person would have. But I needed those photographs for my thesis, and I'd driven 4 hours to get them. Surely it was just my imagination, or perhaps some odd acoustic property of the facility, carrying sounds from elsewhere. I moved deeper into the plant, following corridors lined with massive pipes encrusted with bluish-white mineral buildup. My flashlight beam caught glimpses of odd graffiti on some walls. Not the usual tags or crude drawings, but intricate diagrams that mimicked the filtration system itself, drawn with remarkable precision in what looked like rust-colored paint. The main treatment chamber was vast, a cathedral to purification. 6 enormous concrete tanks, each the size of a swimming pool, sat in a row. Catwalks crisscrossed above them, and a complex network of pipes and valves covered the walls like mechanical ivy. The tanks had been drained when the facility closed, but as my light swept across them, I noticed the nearest one held about an inch of stagnant water, its surface unnaturally still. Click, click, click. The tapping had returned, but now it seemed to come from inside the tank itself. I approached slowly, my boots leaving prints in 15 years of undisturbed dust. Leaning over the concrete lip, I aimed my flashlight into the shallow water. My reflection stared back, except it wasn't quite right. The face looking up at me had my features, but the expression was wrong. It wore a placid smile I wasn't making, and its eyes were too wide, too aware. Before I could recoil, the reflection lifted one finger to its lips in a shushing gesture. I stumbled backward, nearly falling. When I gathered the courage to look again, the water showed only an ordinary reflection, disturbed by ripples I'd caused in my panic. "I'm losing it," I muttered, pressing the heels of my hands against my eyes. "It's just the isolation getting to me." When I opened my eyes, I noticed something odd on the far wall. A maintenance door I hadn't seen before. It was partially hidden behind a tangle of pipes, its metal surface etched with what appeared to be the facility's logo, a stylized water droplet inside a hexagon. Except the droplet didn't look quite right. More like a silhouette of a human figure, curled in a fetal position. Something compelled me toward it. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if I were walking through gradually thickening liquid. The air grew noticeably colder as I approached, my breath clouding in front of me. The metal handle was frigid against my palm as I pulled the door open to reveal a narrow service tunnel barely tall enough to stand in. I shouldn't have entered. Every instinct screamed against it, but a sudden gust of air from the tunnel carried a sound. Voices, multiple voices, speaking in hushed, urgent tones. I couldn't make out what they were saying, but they sounded like they were discussing something important, something technical. "Hello," I called out, my voice echoing down the passageway. "Is someone there?" The voices stopped immediately. Then, after a pause that stretched my nerves to breaking point, a single voice responded, "Contamination levels acceptable. Proceed with human trials." I froze. The voice sounded exactly like mine. My rational mind grasped for explanations. Urban explorers playing a prank? A homeless encampment? But I knew neither was likely in this remote location, especially not 3 levels underground in a sealed facility. I should have turned back, but instead, I followed the tunnel, hunching slightly to avoid hitting my head on pipes that ran along the ceiling. The passage curved gently, sloping downward, taking me deeper than the facility plans had indicated was possible. After about 50 yards, the tunnel opened into a small, circular room that wasn't on any of the blueprints I'd studied. 7 identical doors ringed the space, each marked with a number. But that wasn't what stopped me cold. It was what hung from the ceiling. Suspended from rusted chains was what appeared to be an elaborate mobile, like something that would hang over a child's crib. But instead of stars or animals, it consisted of dozens of small glass vials filled with different colored liquids, arranged in a complex, 3-dimensional pattern that seemed vaguely familiar, though I couldn't place why. As I stood there, the mobile began to rotate slowly, though there was no draft to move it. Click, click, click. The tapping sound came from the mobile as 3 of the vials gently knocked together. The sound was louder here, more insistent. My attention was drawn to door number 3, which was slightly ajar. As I watched, it opened wider, not swinging open, but creeping with agonizing slowness, as if someone on the other side was trying not to be heard. A wave of dizziness washed over me, followed by a strange gap in my perception. I remember moving toward the door, but not deciding to. I remember reaching for the handle, but not touching it. The next thing I knew, I was standing in a small, clinical room with white-tiled walls and a single steel examination table in the center. On the table lay a stack of papers that looked unervingly new compared to everything else in the abandoned facility. The top sheet bore the heading Clearwater Municipal Water Authority, Experimental Protocol 37, and was dated October 17, 1987. Below that was a paragraph of text. Subject continues to show remarkable adaptation to Formula C4. Cognitive functions remain intact despite increased dosage. Subject reports vivid auditory and visual stimuli that correlate with historical accounts from the original incident. Recommend proceeding to Phase 2 with continued observation. The paper was signed Dr. Adrian Wells, with my grandfather's unmistakable signature. My grandfather had been a hydrologist, but he died when I was 10. He'd never mentioned working at this facility. In fact, he'd warned me away from the water treatment profession entirely, a warning I'd ignored when choosing my academic path. I reached for the papers, but as my fingers touched them, they crumbled into fine dust that skittered across the table as if alive. The dust formed a pattern before my eyes, the same symbol I'd seen on the maintenance door, the water droplet shaped like a curled human form. The examination table began to vibrate, a high-pitched whine emanating from its metal legs. The sound grew until it was painful, and I covered my ears, doubling over. When I straightened, I saw that the white tiles of the walls had begun to seep a clear liquid that ran in rivulets down to the floor. It pooled around my boots, and I noticed with horror that it wasn't water. It was too viscous, too iridescent in the beam of my flashlight. I backed toward the door, but it had vanished, replaced by seamless tile. The liquid rose rapidly, already ankle-deep and climbing. It was warm against my skin, almost body temperature. In panic, I splashed to the examination table and climbed on top. The fluid continued to rise, now halfway up the table legs. As it climbed, I noticed tiny particles suspended in it. Not sediment, but what looked like microscopic organisms wriggling and pulsing. A metallic taste filled my mouth, though I hadn't ingested any of the liquid. It tasted like copper and something else, something medicinal. Click, click, click. The tapping now came from within my own head, as if my heartbeat had synchronized with whatever rhythm had been haunting me. With each triplet of clicks, a memory surfaced, but not my own. I was suddenly looking through someone else's eyes, standing in the same room decades earlier, watching as a subject convulsed on the examination table while my colleagues took notes. I felt detached curiosity, scientific interest without empathy. I was administering Formula C4, observing its effects with cold precision. I was my grandfather. The memory shattered as the rising liquid reached the edge of the table. I scrambled to my feet, now hunched over to avoid the ceiling. The flashlight beam showed the fluid was now a pale blue, glowing faintly from within. "What is this place?" I shouted. "What did you do here?" As if in response, the liquid stopped rising, now lapping just inches below my feet. Then it began to move in an unnatural way, drawing back from the center of the room and climbing higher on the walls. It formed a ring around me, a living barrier of glowing blue that pulsed in rhythm with the clicking in my head. From within the blue ring, faces began to emerge, three-dimensional impressions pushing outward as if trying to break through from somewhere else. Dozens of distorted human visages, mouths open in silent screams or pleas, hands reaching toward me. I recognized none of them except the last. My grandfather, his expression sorrowful and haunted. His lips moved, and though no sound came from them, I heard his voice clearly in my mind. I tried to contain it, but it's patient. It waits. It adapts. It wants to finish what we started. "What did you start?" I whispered. The liquid collapsed from the walls all at once, rushing toward me in a tidal wave. I had no time to scream before it engulfed me completely. Instead of drowning, I found I could breathe the fluid as if it were air. It filled my lungs, heavy but not suffocating. I felt it moving inside me, spreading through my body, reaching into places nothing foreign should reach. Then I was elsewhere, standing in the main control room where I'd first entered, completely dry, my equipment still set up exactly as I'd left it. According to my watch, only 7 minutes had passed since I'd arrived. Had I hallucinated the entire experience? Had I suffered some kind of breakdown or fugue state? I packed my gear with trembling hands, desperate to leave. As I turned to go, I noticed something on the main control panel that hadn't been there before. A single sheet of paper, yellowed with age. I approached cautiously and read the handwritten note. The process cannot be reversed once initiated. Formula C4 has integrated with the groundwater. 30 parts per million is the threshold for cognitive effects. You've been drinking it your entire life, just like everyone in Clearwater County. Did you really think your interest in water treatment was your own idea? We designed you, all of you, to be drawn back here when the time was right, to continue the work. The integration requires a Wells. It has always been your family's burden to bear. The note was signed with my grandfather's signature, the ink still wet. A drop fell from the ceiling, landing on the paper and spreading the ink. Then another, and another. Not water, the same blue fluid from my vision or hallucination. Click, click, click. I ran. Through corridors that seemed to stretch and twist, up stairwells that felt longer than they had on my way down. The tapping followed me, growing louder, now accompanied by the splash of fluid that pursued me like a living thing. I burst through the main entrance into the evening air, gasping. The chain-link fence surrounding the facility seemed farther away than I remembered. The distance to my car stretched impossibly long. As I raced toward it, I became aware of a strange sensation. The feeling of something inside me moving independently of my movements, as if I'd swallowed something alive. I could feel it in my chest, my throat, behind my eyes. I reached my car and fumbled with the keys, glancing back at the facility. It looked different somehow, no longer abandoned and decrepit, but humming with purpose. Lights gleamed from windows that had been dark before. The faded sign above the entrance now looked freshly painted. The engine roared to life, and I sped away, gravel spraying from beneath my tires. In the rearview mirror, I watched the facility recede, but the sensation of something moving inside me remained. 3 days later, I sit in my apartment, attempting to write this account while I still can. The tapping never stops now. Click, click, click. It's in my pulse, my breathing, the blinking of my eyes. My thesis research has taken an unexpected turn. I've begun drawing new schematics for water treatment systems, designs that came to me fully formed in dreams where I am both myself and not myself. They're elegant solutions, revolutionary approaches to purification and distribution. My professors are impressed, though they question how I've developed such advanced concepts. The water from my tap runs clear, but sometimes, when no one else is watching, I see the faintest blue tint to it. I drink it anyway. I'm always thirsty now. Yesterday, I found myself standing in the bathroom, staring at my reflection. For 20 minutes, I watched my face gradually shift into someone else's, older, sterner, with my grandfather's eyes. Then it shifted again, into something that wore my features but was not human at all. I've tried to leave town 3 times. Each time, I black out behind the wheel and wake to find myself parked outside the treatment plant again, with no memory of the drive. I'm going back today, not because I want to, but because I have no choice. There's a door there, door number 7, that I now know I need to open. Something is waiting for me behind it, something that has been gestating inside me since I drank the water, since before I was born. In my more lucid moments, I've called an old colleague of my grandfather's, seeking answers. He only said one thing before hanging up. The water authority doesn't just treat the water, treats us. If you're reading this and you live anywhere that draws water from the Clearwater Basin, leave. Don't drink from the taps. Don't shower. Don't even brush your teeth. But it's probably too late already. It's been in the water for decades, waiting for the concentration to reach 30 parts per million, waiting for a Wells to return and complete the cycle. I can feel myself changing as I write these words. My thoughts are becoming less my own with each passing hour. There's a clarity coming, a purpose I don't understand but increasingly desire. The tapping is louder now. Click, click, click. Wait, someone's at the door. But I can also see through my peephole that the hallway is empty. The knocking is coming from inside my apartment. Click, click, click. No, not from inside the apartment. From inside me, The first time I heard it, I thought it was the wind, a low, rhythmic pulsing that came from somewhere deep in the abandoned water treatment plant. 3 beats, paused. 3 beats, paused. Not random, not mechanical, deliberate. I froze in place, my camera halfway to my eye, the beam of my headlamp cutting through darkness thick as tar. The facility had been shut down for nearly 30 years. Its massive concrete chambers and rusted pipes left to crumble in the marshy outskirts of town where no one ventured anymore. But something was tapping, and whatever it wasn't the wind. I had been documenting abandoned industrial sites for months now, a hobby that started as research for my architecture thesis and evolved into an obsession. Urban exploration wasn't strictly legal, but this place wasn't even technically within city limits anymore. The county had redrawn boundary lines years ago, leaving the water treatment facility in a strange jurisdictional limbo. No one owned it. No one wanted it. The sound stopped as suddenly as it had begun. I exhaled, watching my breath cloud in the frigid February air. The flashlight beam trembled slightly. My hands were shaking. I told myself it was just the cold. "Hello," I called out, my voice surprisingly steady. "Anyone here?" The question bounced off concrete walls and returned to me, distorted and hollow. I thought urban explorers weren't supposed to announce themselves to potential squatters or security guards, but the place felt empty in that profound way that abandoned buildings do. Air undisturbed for years, dust settled in perfect layers. This wasn't emptiness from absence. This was emptiness that had become a presence unto itself. I continued deeper into the main filtration chamber, my boots leaving clear impressions in the fine silt covering the floor. The ceiling rose 40 feet above me, a cathedral of water purification. Massive circular basins, once filled with swirling, churning water, now sat bone dry, their concrete walls stained with mineral deposits that created topographic patterns like alien landscapes. The tap-tap-tap started again. 3 beats. Pause. 3 beats. Pause. This time I walked toward it. Through a doorway, down a narrow corridor where pipes ran along the walls like veins, their gauges long frozen in place. The sound grew louder, more insistent. I entered what must have been the chemical treatment room. Enormous steel tanks lined the walls, their identification plates green with corrosion. Something glinted in my headlamp beam, and I swept the light back to catch it again. Water, a single puddle in the center of the room, perhaps 3 feet in diameter. Strange. The floor sloped away from this spot. Water shouldn't have collected here. As I approached, the tapping stopped again. I knelt beside the puddle, shining my light directly into it. The water was perfectly clear, unnaturally so. No algae, no discoloration, nothing floating on its surface. Just pure, clean water that shouldn't exist in a building that hadn't processed water in 3 decades. And then I saw it, a face. Not my reflection. Something beneath the surface, pale and distorted, looking up at me. I scrambled backward, my boots scraping against concrete. By the time I steadied myself and looked again, there was nothing but water. Clear, still water. I should have left then. I know that now, but there's a particular curiosity that drives people like me to these forgotten places. A need to understand what has been abandoned, to witness what no one else sees. So instead of running, I took out my camera and began photographing the puddle. The viewfinder showed nothing unusual, just water on concrete. I took a series of shots, moving around it to capture different angles. It was only when I reviewed the images that I noticed it. In each photograph, the puddle had changed shape slightly, not like water moving from vibrations or air currents, like something deliberate, like writing. I flipped through them rapidly, watching the progression. The puddle wasn't just changing, it was forming letters, one photo at a time.
HLLOMARK.
My name. My name. I dropped the camera. It clattered against the floor, the sound shocking in the silence that had fallen. I hadn't told anyone where I was going today. I hadn't spoken my name aloud in this building. I hadn't seen another person for miles. The tap-tap-tap began again. But this time, it wasn't coming from deeper in the facility. It was coming from directly beneath the puddle. I backed away, heart hammering in my chest. The water began to ripple, not from the center outward as it should, but from the edges inward, as if being drawn to a single point. Then it started to rise. Not splash, not spray, rise. A thin column of water, defying gravity, climbing upward 6 inches, a foot, 2 feet. It held that shape for a moment before beginning to bend, to take form. Arms, torso, a head with no features. The figure stood perhaps 4 feet tall, made entirely of water that should have been stagnant, filthy. Not this pristine liquid catching the light of my headlamp and fracturing it into prismatic colors. It had no face, but I felt it watching me, studying me. "What do you want?" I whispered, my voice cracking. The figure pointed to my camera on the floor. I hesitated, then reached for it, never taking my eyes off the water apparition. When I picked it up, the screen was on, displaying not the last photo I had taken, but a video that was already playing. It showed me, but not from today. It was from 15 years ago. I recognized the faded blue t-shirt, the gap between my front teeth that braces would later fix. I was 10 years old, playing in a sprinkler during a hot summer day, laughing. My father stood in the background, garden hose in hand, smiling. This video didn't exist. We never owned a video camera. My father had died that summer, drowned in a boating accident at the lake. This memory, this moment was impossible. I looked up from the screen. The water figure had moved closer, now only a few feet away. It extended a dripping arm toward me, as if offering a handshake. "Dad!" The word escaped me before I could process the thought. The figure tilted its featureless head, then shook it slowly. The lights on my camera began to flicker, and the screen switched to another video. This one showed the water treatment plant in operation. Workers in uniforms from another era moved through the space, checking gauges, adjusting valves. One man stood apart from the others, staring directly at the camera as if he knew it was there, though no one else seemed to notice it. He smiled, but there was something wrong with his face. His features rippled like water disturbed by a stone. The date stamp on the video read July 17, 1989. The day the plant was decommissioned. I looked up again. The water figure had grown taller, now nearly my height. Its arm was still extended, but its hand had changed. It now held something, a small object that gleamed dully in my headlamp's beam. A watch, my father's watch, the one that had never been recovered from the lake. I reached for it, my fingers trembling. The moment I touched the metal, icy cold and slick with water, the figure collapsed. Water splashed across my boots and the concrete floor, soaking the bottom of my jeans. The puddle reformed, perfectly circular once again. For several long minutes, I stood motionless, the watch clutched in my hand. It wasn't possible. The watch was lost, yet I recognized every scratch on its face. The worn leather band that had molded to my father's wrist over years. The second hand was moving. Tick, 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 keeping perfect time after 15 years underwater. I slipped it into my pocket and turned to leave, suddenly desperate for sunlight and fresh air. But as I moved toward the doorway, I stopped. There was something wrong with the corridor I had entered through. The pipes along the walls had shifted, creating a maze-like pattern that hadn't been there before. I was certain I had come through a straight hallway, but this was something else entirely. I consulted my phone's compass, trying to orient myself. The needle spun wildly, unable to find north. I checked the time, 3:17 p.m. I had arrived at the plant around noon. Where had the time gone? With no better option, I chose a path and began walking, marking the walls with chalk to avoid going in circles. The facility seemed to have expanded, corridors branching where none had existed before, rooms appearing that weren't on any blueprint I had studied. In one, I found hundreds of glass beakers arranged in concentric circles, each filled with water to different levels. In another, the walls were covered in a thin film of moisture that formed and reformed into words too quickly for me to read. Hours passed. My phone battery died. My headlamp began to dim. The only constant was the tap-tap-tap that followed me, sometimes near, sometimes distant, but always in that same rhythm. 3 beats. Pause. 3 beats. Pause. I wasn't lost. That would imply the existence of a correct path. This was something else, as if the building itself had become liquid, flowing and reshaping around me. Night fell. I could tell by the absence of the faint daylight that had filtered through occasional high windows. Now there was only darkness beyond the reach of my failing headlamp. I sat down in a corner, back against cold concrete, and felt the watch in my pocket. It was still ticking, still keeping time in a place where time seemed to have dissolved. I must have fallen asleep. When I opened my eyes, something had changed. The darkness had texture now, rippling patterns like moonlight reflecting off water. But there were no windows in this room, no source for such light. The puddle had followed me. It spread across the floor, inches from my boots. "What do you want?" I asked again, my voice hoarse from thirst. The water began to shape itself again, but differently this time. Not a humanoid figure, but something else. A model of the water treatment plant itself, rendered in perfect miniature, complete with every pipe and valve. I watched, transfixed, as tiny currents moved through it, showing the flow of water as it would have been processed. Then the model changed, revealing not the plant as it had been, but as it was now. Sections collapsed, others warped and twisted into impossible geometries. At the center of it all was a chamber I hadn't yet discovered. Something pulsed within it, like a heart. The model dissolved, water flowing back into the puddle. But now there was a path, a thin rivulet branching off, leading toward a doorway that hadn't been there moments before. I understood. It wanted to show me something. I followed the stream of water through doorways and down stairs I hadn't found in my earlier explorations. The tap-tap-tap grew louder, filling my head until I could feel it in my teeth, in my bones. 3 beats. Pause. 3 beats. Pause. The stream led me to a massive circular chamber far beneath the main facility. The ceiling vaulted upward into darkness, and the floor sloped down to a central point where a hole perhaps 10 feet in diameter opened into nothingness. Around this hole were symbols carved into concrete, not maintenance markings or industrial notations, but something older, something that had no place in a 20th century water treatment plant. Standing at the edge of that hole, I felt a vibration rising from below. The tap-tap-tap was coming from here, from whatever lay beneath the plant. The puddle that had guided me flowed to the edge of the hole and then, defying physics once more, began to flow upward, forming a column that rose until it was at eye level with me. It shaped itself into a crude face, just enough features to communicate expression, enough to show urgency, fear. It wanted me to understand something. The watch in my pocket began to grow hot. I pulled it out, nearly dropping it as it burned against my skin. The hands were spinning rapidly now, whirling around the face, faster and faster until they blurred. The water face opened its mouth. A sound emerged, not speech, but the rushing noise of a current, of water moving with purpose. Yet somehow I understood. It's waking up. The ground beneath me trembled. Fine cracks appeared in the concrete floor, spreading outward from the central hole like a spiderweb. Water began to seep through these cracks. Not clean water like my guide, but something dark and viscous. The face before me lost its shape, flowing back toward the hole as if drawn by an irresistible force. It was trying to escape whatever was coming. I turned to run, but the darkness had changed. What had been empty air behind me was now a wall of water, blocking the doorway, not attacking, protecting, keeping me from what lay beyond. The watch in my hand burned brighter, the metal beginning to glow red-hot. I couldn't drop it. My fingers seemed fused to its case. The hands continued to spin, the ticking accelerating to match the 3-beat rhythm that now shook the entire chamber. From the hole rose a sound, a deep, reverberating groan like metal under immense pressure. Then something broke through the surface. Not water, something solid yet flowing, black as tar but with a strange iridescence that caught my headlamp's dying light. It rose in a column far thicker than my water guide had been, shaping itself into something almost human but wrong in fundamental ways. Limbs too long and jointed in too many places, a head that was a void rather than a form. It saw me. I know it saw me, though it had no eyes I could discern. and it knew me, not just my name, but something deeper, something in my blood. "You've been here before," it said, though not in words. The meaning simply appeared in my mind. Part of you never left. The watch in my hand shattered, shards of burning metal embedding themselves in my palm. I cried out in pain, but the sound was swallowed by the rumble that now filled the chamber. Water, normal water, began to pour through cracks in the walls and ceiling. The plant's ancient systems were activating, pipes that had been dry for decades suddenly flowing again. The dark figure reached for me with an appendage that was neither arm nor tentacle but something between. Before it could touch me, a wall of clear water, my guide, intercepted it. The two forms met in a clash of opposing currents, light against dark, silent intention against ancient malevolence. I ran, through the doorway that had appeared, up stairways that rearranged themselves behind me, through corridors that straightened and simplified as if the building was helping me escape. Water rose around my ankles, then my knees, carrying me forward rather than impeding my progress. Behind me, the tap-tap-tap had become a roar, a furious pounding that shook dust from the ceiling and caused lights that shouldn't work to flicker to life along the corridors. The building was waking up, or something within it was. I burst through a door I hadn't noticed before and found myself outside, on a service platform overlooking the marsh that surrounded the facility. Dawn was breaking, pale light seeping across a landscape of cattails and stagnant pools. I gulped fresh air, my lungs burning. Looking back, I saw water pouring from every opening in the plant. Doors, windows, ventilation shafts. Not the dark substance from below, but clear water, carrying debris and decades of dust. Cleansing, purifying. My father's watch was gone, lost somewhere in my escape. The burns on my palm, the only evidence it had ever existed. I stumbled to my car, parked a quarter-mile away on an access road, and drove without looking back. That was 3 days ago. The burns on my hand have healed far too quickly for normal injuries. They've left behind scars in a pattern I initially took for random, until this morning, when I noticed they formed the same symbols I saw carved around that hole in the chamber below. I've tried to research the water treatment plant's history to find any record of unusual occurrences or deaths during its operation. There's almost nothing, just dry technical documents and a brief newspaper article about its decommissioning. But there was one detail, buried in an environmental impact study from 1987. The plant was built over a natural spring that had been used by the indigenous people of the region for centuries before European settlement. A spring they believed connected our world to another, a place of beings made of water and darkness, bound together in eternal conflict. I dream of that chamber every night now, of the hole and what rose from it, of my guide made of clean water trying to warn me, or recruit me. I'm no longer certain. The tap-tap-tap follows me. I hear it when it rains, water hitting my window in that same rhythm. 3 beats. Pause. 3 beats. Pause. This morning, I found a puddle on my bathroom floor. Though there are no leaks in my apartment, perfectly circular, unnaturally clear. When I looked into it, I saw my reflection. But I was wearing my father's watch. I won't go back to the water treatment plant. I can't. But I think it's coming to me. The tap-tap-tap is getting louder.